Hey there guys, welcome to my reaction slash analysis video for the Resident Evil showcase. I'm only now getting to this because I was in the middle of classes and I was doing a lot of studying for an exam I took today, but now that that's done, I have a bit of breathing room to finally get this video out. So, if you guys don't know, there was a Resident Evil showcase that they did a couple of days ago. It was about half an hour long, and they showcased stuff for Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil Reverse, and Resident Evil 4 Remake. And for this video, I've trimmed out a lot of the unnecessary stuff and things that I don't feel are very important. And the only things I'm really going to be showing here are with Resident Evil Village and with Resident Evil 4 Remake. But with the Resident Evil Village part of this video, the only part I've really included is just stuff regarding the Shadows of Rose DLC, because what would I be saying with the third-person perspective or with the Mercenaries mode? You've already seen my video, which is titled, "The Resident Evil Village DLC looks offensive, disappointing, and insulting." Yeah, and I've talked a lot about my objective thoughts on the Mercenaries mode and the third-person mode, but they've given a bit of information for the Shadows of Rose DLC, but not much, and that was one of the most disappointing parts of the showcase. Like, IGN was already showing gameplay of the Shadows of Rose DLC, but they could have at least provided some kind of gameplay footage of the Shadows of Rose DLC, but they're still being equally as vague, and they're not correcting the lore properly. Like, they're not discussing the lore that they introduced in Resident Evil Village. They're only introducing the more superficial aspects of the lore and discussing it here. So yeah, that was very disappointing, but the only part I've really included from the Shadows of Rose DLC is just this developer interview where some developer, the director of the Winter's expansion actually, he's actually explained the Shadows of Rose DLC, but I mean, there's stuff to take from that, but the primary point of this video is to focus more on Resident Evil 4 Remake, because the Resident Evil 4 Remake part of the showcase was actually exciting. Even though I know that Resident Evil 4 Remake is likely going to be helmed by an incompetent development team on par with that of Resident Evil Village's development team, but I'll explain more in this video. But let's get started on this right here. So this is the Shadows of Rose DLC.
I'm Kento Kinoshita, the director of the Winter's expansion. Ethan gave his life to protect Rose.
Well, it's unfortunate that you guys completely ruined his sacrifice because you brought back the Mega Mycete, so Ethan's sacrifice means absolutely nothing now. And that right there is just completely insulting. It's almost like what happened in Star Wars Episode 9, where they brought back Palpatine, and it just makes Darth Vader's sacrifice completely pointless. So yeah, that's a massive insult to Ethan Winters right there. And they haven't even gone and explained why Ethan is the way he is. Like, Ethan being made out of the mold is the biggest plot hole ever in the entirety of Resident Evil Village. And also, setting this DLC 16 years after Resident Evil Village doesn't make any sense, because that kind of time jump should warrant its own game, not its DLC. And also, this entire DLC is just focused on removing Rose's powers. I mean, I'm saying powers, because this developer really treats this entire DLC like it's a fantasy, not really something diegetic within the universe of Resident Evil, which is a biological survival horror realistic environment and universe. And it just makes no sense at all. And the 16-year thing, I mean, they're explaining why Rose is 16 years old here, but let's just hear a bit more of this.
And in the end, you see how she's grown. What kind of person is 16-year-old Rose?
Now, this part doesn't really make any sense to me, guys, because if you played Resident Evil Village and you actually examined each of the Rose flasks, you'll understand that there is a bit of text attached to the flask, and it actually mentions stuff about the subjects not receiving treatments and therefore they rapidly age, this and that. It feels like something that was reused from unused assets of Resident Evil 7. And I mentioned this many times before, but that piece of text doesn't serve any purpose at all, and it just feels like a contradictory lore aspect, because this whole part with the subjects rapidly aging if they're not given any treatments, it doesn't apply to Rose, because they've said that she's naturally grown in the 16 years after Resident Evil Village. So she is like 16 years old here, but why would you make it like that if you're then going to put those texts on the flask that belonged to Evelyn, because Evelyn was the one where that piece of text actually applies to her because she rapidly aged because of those treatments, and it was all because of the chromosomal abnormalities with her that caused her to rapidly age. But the fact that it's clear that this developer has not even gone back to Resident Evil Village and properly examined the rose flasks and actually examined the piece of text on each of the flasks that talks about the idea of these treatments staving off the rapidly aging aspect, that doesn't make any sense, guys. And it really feels like they just reused assets from Resident Evil 7, like some unused version of Resident Evil 7, and they just put those assets into the flasks for Resident Evil Village without properly thinking about why that is such a violation of the lore and a really confusing lore point. So Rose naturally aging by 16 years contradicts the text that was actually on those flasks, and it really doesn't make any sense.
That's what we wanted to explore, so we decided to have her at that age in this expansion.
So there is her friend right there. I think that's Michael, or is that David? I don't remember what his name is.
You said you had something important to tell me?
Oh, never mind. I don't think they actually revealed this guy's name, but I assume it's Michael. Now, this is the part right here where I've already talked about this, but this whole realm of consciousness aspect, it feels so fantastical in its interpretation compared to the likes of Evil Within, where in the Evil Within, they gave a scientific basis for why STEM was a thing and why there was this collective consciousness of individuals contributing to this artificial world, basically. And that right there actually made it feel like it stood out from like supernatural games or games like this where they're trying to use some of the most ridiculous explanations ever for the realm of consciousness, and it's so confusing.
She's trying to get rid of her unwanted powers.
Yeah, and again, this part in here doesn't make any sense. She's trying to get rid of her abilities, and they even use the term powers here, which is stupid, because powers is a term associated with the fantastical realm, not a grounded sci-fi survival horror universe. But why would you set up Rose having her abilities in Resident Evil Village if in the next DLC, not even its own game, you're just going to remove her abilities? It's like you could have told the story of Resident Evil Village where you didn't set up Rose having abilities. In fact, like the whole explanation with Rose having her abilities and just the way her abilities are shown in the game are so confusing. But like you then look to the next DLC, not even the next game, and you're already removing her abilities. Like, why go through all the effort then? Why go through all the effort of introducing her abilities if you're just going to completely remove them in the DLC? That just seems so pointless. It's Occam's razor. It's just a convoluted explanation that is parallel to the very idea of Rose not having her abilities anyway. It makes no sense.
But to do that, she is forced to return to the origin of her misfortune.
And I still don't understand how the Megamycete is still around. I mean, did the BSAA somehow manage to extract a bit of the Megamycete before Ethan managed to blow it up? And like 16 years and the Megamycete is still active? I mean, it's bizarre that it's still active for all this time. I mean, I'm assuming that large Megamycete sample underneath the village was likely connected to, or maybe it was reproducing for all I know. I don't know, like because they said the Megamycete is a parasitic super colony, and yet somehow it has the ability to create this realm of consciousness. And I assume it's directly tied into this real-world scenario where the hyphae of fungi can transmit electrical signals, and they're using that as the basis for this realm of consciousness. They don't go into a good explanation regarding the Megamycete here, or why it's back, or why it's just able to create this realm of consciousness. I mean, the realm of consciousness was something we saw back in Resident Evil 7, but it was such a small thing, you didn't really think about it. But now they're making it such a big deal here, and just the interpretation of it just seems silly to me.
We thought that concept had a lot of potential for an interesting story.
Yeah, well, you took quite an over-the-top route with creating this so-called interesting story, guys.
So the setting this time is the realm of consciousness.
which is just going to be nothing but reused assets from the castle, most likely. I mean, is there any new content here aside from that lab area that we see Rose in?
Going back one more time to that village.
And this looks like it was inspired by Resident Evil 6. The hands coming out of the walls. It's inspired by the Carla Redeems boss fight, because when you were trying to escape Carla, hands came out of the wall and they would grab you and you had to escape before another version of Carla would actually devour you.
The word nightmare is synonymous with fear. For instance, if you've ever had a childhood fever that caused a nightmare, even if they only last for an instant, like the feeling of being attacked by a giant doll.
This right here just seems a bit silly. I'm not too sure where the doll aspect comes from here. I mean, why would Rose really have this fear of dolls? I mean, is it inspired by Beneviento or something? Maybe because we know that in a flashback moment when Ethan puts in the flask into the Giant's Chalice, he sees a flashback of Rose being abducted by the four lords. I mean, she was first abducted by Miranda, and then in another flashback, she actually bears witness to the lords. So I'm guessing she must have seen Beneviento and thought it was creepy at 6 months old, which, I mean, maybe it's embedded within her consciousness or subconsciousness. I mean, it still feels very over the top. Like, again, if this was Evil Within, I would completely excuse this, because with Evil Within, it makes a lot of sense. But here, it comes across as
similarly
weird.
So completely unrealistic can remain as a fragment of a...
And right here, you see how big that door is? Is this some kind of psychological scenario where Rose is shrunk down to the size of a mouse, and she's trying to run away from this big thing?
memory for the rest of your life.
Wonder what that's going to be like.
I wanted the core of the feeling of fear to come from the kind of memories and nightmares that still haunt people to this day. In an FPS, you
Oh, never mind. I did put the third-person mode here.
experience the game world as if it's through your own eyes.
Hold on.
In an FPS, you experience the game world as if it's through your own eyes.
No, that's not a good interpretation of it, because that's the kind of statement you'd apply to VR, not to first-person mode. Like, first-person mode, you're staring at a TV screen, and the character is in the first-person mode. You are not merged with that character's perspective. With VR, it is completely different. That's the accurate description right there.
So it can be incredibly scary to play a horror game from that perspective.
Because everything's so close up. That I can understand. That's even like the main point of contention I have with this third-person mode.
There are some players out there who might find it too scary or experience motion sickness in the first-person perspective.
Now, Ether had already mentioned this to me during my initial reaction to the Resident Evil Village DLC, but he said that, you know, the people who play first-person mode, some people experience motion sickness when they're playing first-person mode, which is mind-boggling to say the least. And Ether says he has a couple of friends that suffer from motion sickness when they actually view a first-person game, but a couple of my subscribers, including myself, don't really understand how you can get motion sickness from the first-person perspective. I mean, the whole idea of motion sickness is entirely applied to the camera, not based on camera perspective, but on camera movement and camera wiggling and the like. I mean, I look at Laser Z's stream, for instance, like literally in the very first stream of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, when he got on his horse, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a third-person game, he said that the camera, when you were actually riding your horse in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, was nauseating. And that's a third-person game, so he was experiencing like something on par with motion sickness when he was playing a third-person game because of the way the camera bounces around. Like, camera perspective has nothing to do with motion sickness. I don't buy that for 1 second. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. Like, when you're talking about VR, again, you've merged with the character's perspective, right? I mean, I myself have even done VR. Do you have any idea how disorienting it was doing VR for the first time? I mean, there was like a roller coaster VR simulator I played, and just the way, like on screen, like in my VR headset, we were descending down, we were going up, and we were going sideways. It really felt like I was there, and my body was like subconsciously reacting to these changes to the perspective like that, or with these kind of movements happening in the VR game because I was merged with it. Like I was actually there. That's a completely different experience to first person perspective. Like when you're just talking about VR, that makes sense. But when you're talking about just first person, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't even feel like that was the main reason for the third person mode at all in Resident Evil Village. I feel like other decisions or like other incentive or like some kind of pressure caused new Capcom to favor the third person perspective.
They might not enjoy the FPS genre.
And it also makes absolutely no sense here, guys. So I discussed this with Ether, but I asked him, like, the people that get motion sickness from Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 7, surely they played other first-person games like Call of Duty, and yet for some reason those games don't cause motion sickness. I mean, Ether mentioned that apparently the FOV in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village is a lot tighter, like it's a smaller value, so it's a lot closer to you. So like you're not really seeing that much of a wider field of view in these games compared to Call of Duty. But if I'm completely honest, guys, I don't notice a difference in the FOV between Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village when comparing it to Call of Duty. Like it feels like they have very similar FOVs. So I don't understand that point at all. Like I just thought that was like a normality right there. But apparently there's some kind of minor adjustment to the FOV for the first-person perspective in Resident Evil 7 and Village that allows it to be closer compared to Call of Duty. I don't get that.
So we wanted to make a third-person mode for those players.
Yeah, and that right there is just new Capcom caving into fans' demands. They said they wanted to do this, but in actuality, I bet what happened is too many people who are still favoring these tiresome old arguments of camera perspective dictating what Resident Evil is. So many people complained about the first-person perspective because, oh, it's not third person, so therefore it's not Resident Evil. Like, I don't know where these arguments come from, where people think camera perspective is what dictates what a Resident Evil game is. These same tiresome old arguments were present during the era of Resident Evil 4. Like, there was this whole fixed camera versus over-the-shoulder perspective arguments happening, and it was just so undeserved and one of the dumbest forms of argument you could ever give to a game. And now they're just reigniting it here. And Capcom is just adding more wood to the fire by openly acknowledging these people, albeit in a more subtle way, and just putting in this mode. So they're pretty much reigniting and stoking the fires of these tiresome old arguments. And furthermore, the first-person perspective is a character trait. Like when they actually did the interviews for Ethan Winters, like when they were talking about Ethan Winters in their development interviews for Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, the developers looked at the camera perspective not just as a camera perspective, but as a character trait. Like, Ethan was meant to be this blank slate of a character. He was meant to be you, in that he was meant to be a representation of the gamer who was actually playing through the first-person perspective. And furthermore, the first-person perspective allowed you to be closer to the environment. It allowed you to really feel the closeness of danger to everything else. And it was an interesting idea. It was a very risky challenge right there for Capcom at the time. And I'm talking about Capcom entirely. But, they took a lot of risks with the first-person perspective, and, like, they established that the first-person perspective is to be thought of as, like, a character trait for Ethan. It's meant to be a part of himself, and they marketed Resident Evil Village as Ethan's personal journey. They mentioned this so many times before the game released. And by putting in this third-person perspective and caving into whiny fans, they're pretty much insulting Ethan Winters right here, and they're going against the very messaging that they established before Resident Evil Village released. Like, there's so many other reasons I can give, and if you want to hear more reasons, just check out my video where I say that the Resident Evil Village DLC is disappointing, insulting, and offensive. I go into so much detail about this, and I've even gone into detail about this in my other videos. But this third-person mode, I mean, I've used it. Like, I've actually done the third-person demo, and, it was subpar. It wasn't really that different to the first-person mode. And nothing was really, like, out of place or felt very weird. And it was kind of fun to see Ethan dodge attacks and actually see how honest the hitboxes are with the Moriekas when you're dodging the attacks that actually feel like they're well-designed. But that is completely negligible to this whole argument. The third person perspective should not have been a thing for this game. It's a representation of new Capcom not resting on their laurels, and they're not standing on firm ground. They're just caving into fans' demands. And if the fans are going to dictate everything in a Resident Evil game, then this speaks highly of the dire situation facing the future Resident Evil games. And this is another reason why I'm very reluctant with Resident Evil 4 Remake as well.
To enjoy the game to its fullest. While there's still a sense of immersion and fear with a third-person perspective, when the player character dies, it doesn't feel as much like you yourself are dying.
I'm not too sure why they brought up this point right here. I mean, again, like, wasn't Ethan Winters supposed to be this blank slate of a character, new Capcom? Old Capcom established that. Old Capcom established that Ethan Winters was supposed to be this blank slate of a character. He's supposed to embody you. And now they're just saying, oh, don't think of it like that. Old Capcom was wrong. Believe us. The third-person perspective, we want you to feel like Ethan is dying, not like you're dying, and therefore you're dying through Ethan, this and that. Like, that right there just feels like very contradictory messaging, and honestly another form of insulting commentary.
And you can enjoy playing it as a game to confront the fear that it creates, which is a very different experience.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm not really seeing the fear factor
I think
here.
third-person mode is a perfect way for people to return to Resident Evil Village.
Ah, great. More wood to stoke the fire when they're making these kind of inflammatory statements like this, and they're just feeding into the egos of all the whiny fans who think camera perspective is what dictates a Resident Evil game.
As both a game and an experience. Wouldn't it be okay to show Ethan's face?
And look at this, now they're still sticking to this whole idea of still not showing Ethan's face. When you're talking about just the first-person perspective, you're not bringing up this entire question, but when you have the third-person perspective and you have this whole argument of showing Ethan's face or not, the third-person perspective treats this whole question of seeing Ethan's face as more of like comic relief and just silliness. And they're making this whole idea of not seeing Ethan's face feel even more ridiculous when you can literally see Ethan turning his face away from the camera. Like, something that you never thought of once when you're doing the first-person perspective. You're now thinking of it a lot, and you're just seeing how incredibly forceful and incredibly silly and incredibly ridiculous the developers are when they're trying to make sure you're not seeing Ethan's face. And this third-person mode is once again adding more wood to the fire with this kind of inflammatory action that they decided to give Ethan when he's just completely avoiding the camera. Like, again, if they're so hesitant to show Ethan's face, why the hell would you ever do the third-person perspective? It's just such contradictory thing. It's like diametrically opposed ideas right there. They're diametrically opposed ideas.
We gave that question some thought. So even in third-person mode, if you try to turn the camera to see his face, Ethan will look away.
See, like, it just makes it more profound. It just makes it more profound, the ridicularity of this idea of not seeing Ethan's face when you're favoring this third-person perspective.
And you're not quite able to get a good look.
Okay, but I skipped that because none of that is important, but yeah, that was disappointing. Like, the entirety of the Shadows of Rose DLC and third-person mode showcase was terrible. But with Resident Evil 4 Remake, a lot of excitement flowed through my body during this moment. I mean, there was still a bit of skepticism involved with this game because I've already acknowledged before that I'm very ambivalent with this game. If you want to hear my initial thoughts on Resident Evil 4 Remake, check out my Resident Evil 4 Remake is real, but I'm ambivalent with this game video. And I go into a lot of detail about this. But they've finally shown actual gameplay, which is what I was expecting. And why they would show gameplay for Resident Evil 4 Remake but not show gameplay of the Shadows of Rose DLC, that's confusing. But this was some of the initial gameplay that they actually revealed in a teaser, but we're seeing more of it. So this is during the introduction where Ethan is like searching the village. And I'm guessing he's looking for the first villager, because remember in the original version of Resident Evil 4, he enters that house and there's a villager there. And I'm guessing he's looking for that guy because he says this.
How far could he have gone?
He says, how far could he have gone? So I imagine he's talking about the first villager. He's trying to find out where he is, because he probably ran away. And yeah, there's going to be a lot more interesting gameplay elements. This crouching right here. So I was correct. There is manual crouching in this game. So there's apparently a stealth aspect to this game, and that's interesting. I mean, that was probably too strong of a statement because stealth like this has been in the previous Resident Evil games. I mean, Revelations 2 was the first game to really have a passive crouch mechanic that allowed you to go into stealth. And it looks like they're taking aspects from Revelations 2 in that department when implementing the stealth in this game. But I'm interested to see if they take crouching even further and they make it like Resident Evil 7's crouching. And I'm not bringing Resident Evil Village into this because crouching is so negligible in that game because there are times where the hitboxes work in your favor and they feel believable, and then there are a lot of times where the hitboxes are so dishonest. It's like, why do you bother favoring creativity and unique designs? So I'm hoping that crouching is going to be equally as good as it is in Resident Evil 7. So here it is, the first house. So this is the first villager house, and they've actually changed up this entire house greatly, which is what I was expecting from this remake. And I gotta say, compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, which took absolutely no risks, I mean, aside from the over-the-shoulder perspective, but a lot of the assets just feel the same compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, and it didn't do anything interesting with the gameplay. Like, Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of the worst Resident Evil games I have ever played, and for it to receive the gold standard for remakes, I mean, in some aspects it does deserve that, but for the most part, what good is a remake if you don't have engaging gameplay and you don't have like interesting gameplay designs? You're not favoring creativity whatsoever. You're just running past a bunch of dumb enemies that are so pointless to fight, and then you're just relying upon your knife for a vast majority of the sequences. Really, for all of the sequences, I should be saying. Like, that game is so bare bones and empty, but I'm hoping it's not going to be the same case with Resident Evil 4 Remake. So we enter the house right here, and they've actually added a basement area to this villager's house.
Anyone home?
To give it more of a serial killer vibe. So through this door right here, I believe we enter the basement. And here it is. Wow, look at this. I'm amazed they added all this. Like, that right there is impressive all on its own. And it's going to add a lot more intrigue to the remake, because you know that previous areas from the original version of Resident Evil 4 are not going to be up to your expectations, so it's going to be a complete surprise. But again, the environment shouldn't be the only thing that matters. The gameplay is what should matter, and there is some interesting gameplay elements, but I imagine it's all reserved for easy difficulty. But as you see right here, this game is using some of the assets from Resident Evil Village to inform its decorations and inform its atmosphere. And it's a cool idea because, you know, Resident Evil Village with its village settings, it feels complementary to what a medieval Spanish village would actually be like, even though Resident Evil Village is set in Romania. Yeah, this looks very similar to the first house Ethan enters at the beginning of Resident Evil Village. And Leon's going through something very similar as well. And as you'll see right here, like, just look at the way he's holding his flashlight as well. So, they've taken some inspirations from Resident Evil 3.5 because Leon held his flashlight in the exact same way as well. And, you know, a lot of the iconography here, it looks similar to Resident Evil 3.5. At least there's no stupid ghost aspect. I mean, why the hell would you favor a ghost as an enemy type, or like demented dolls, like possessed demented dolls for enemy types in a Resident Evil game for Resident Evil 3.5? That's stupid. Yeah, we see more of this. So this guy, this villager, has been killing animals, he's been killing livestock, he's been killing people. And we see one of the officers in here as well. So they've made this first officer's fate a lot more grim. And what happened in the original version of Resident Evil 4 is one of the officers was captured by the villagers, and then the other one, his car was rolled off a cliff, and he fell into the water, so we never got to see his body. We only saw the wreckages of the car. But here, we actually get to see the dead body of the first officer. And you get to hear more of Leon's voice acting here. So, Leon's voice actor is kind of a mix between Resident Evil 2 Remake's voice actor, and I'm guessing Paul Mercier's voice acting. I would honestly give it that kind of description. I would say it's a mix of the Resident Evil 2 Remake voice actor and Paul Mercier's voice acting from Resident Evil 4. In terms of like tone, in terms of depth, like in terms of just the way his voice is presented in this game.
I read you.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I do like about this version of Leon in Resident Evil 4 Remake is his more serious tone. I like the fact that he's actually taking the threat seriously, because I feel like he's able to take the threat seriously while still having his more comical side, because you do hear it at certain points in this gameplay demo. But this personality that Leon is displaying right here, it resonates on the same level as his counterpart from Resident Evil Degeneration. And Resident Evil Degeneration has one of my favorite portrayals of Leon. I like the way Leon was portrayed in Resident Evil Degeneration. And like he had the serious voice of Paul Mercier, and you really like resonated with his past traumas and the fact that he was more stoic, like he was a more stoic character in Resident Evil Degeneration, and you didn't see so much of the humor side to it, and it wasn't so overblown with the humor to the point of inducing vomit or just really making you not take the character seriously. But like they're favoring a very similar mix here, so they're making this version of Leon more similar to his Resident Evil Degeneration part. At least he's nothing like his Resident Evil 2 Remake counterpart, because his Resident Evil 2 Remake counterpart is a fucking idiot. And everyone just called him like babyface Leon. And yeah, it's easy to get into that mindset with calling Leon like that, because Leon didn't really have a lot of firm footing to stand on. Like, he didn't really have much of a leg to stand on with his personality in Resident Evil 2 Remake. And like, some people have said that they don't like the voice actor for Resident Evil 4 Remake, but I kind of like it. I mean, I'm okay with it. It's not exceptional. But compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, this is a huge upgrade, I would say.
What's your situation? What the hell's going on?
And so this right here, we get to see this villager right here, and for some reason, this villager has his head dislocated. And he's also resistant to flinch animations for some reason. So watch this. So this guy, you see him? Look at his face. It's actually dislocated, like it's completely torn off, like it's snapped. And so his neck is to the side. And I'm guessing the actual host is dead, but the parasite is taking control, but it hasn't emerged. And in the original version of Resident Evil 4, the plagas, like the actual Lost Plagas, when they were controlling the hosts, the actual hosts, when you shot them, they didn't flinch unless you aim for the head. So it's probably a similar case here. Although I still find it ridiculous how they're still resistant to flinch animations on other parts of their body. Like, you can't shoot their legs and generate a flinch. You have to actually hit their leg several times while they're just busy shrugging off the attacks before they actually get knocked to the ground, and you can do an actual kick on them, or you can suplex them. But for the most part, you're shooting the Lost Plagas in their heads whenever they're like emerged from the host, and that's the only thing that generates hit stun. But right here, he gets a grab out on Leon, and this is my first problem with this game. So you'll notice the grab animation, like before the guy is even grabbed onto Leon's neck, look at his health bar. So they've taken the HUD elements from Resident Evil 4 and incorporated it into this game, and they've added like some small changes, but look at his health. So before he's even grabbed on to Leon, he's already losing health. So you are going to take instant damage the moment a grab animation starts. And that is fucking bullshit. And it disincentivizes you from partaking in like the defense knife mechanic, or like even trying to break out of grabs in general if you're a no damage focused player. And no damage is what you want to play the Resident Evil games around, because it showcases the game at its best level. You're demonstrating professional play. But like, they're introducing all these mechanics with breaking out of grabs, and you'll see in a moment. So right here, you see the knife symbol right there. So you have the ability to use your knife as a defense item, and there's durability on this game. And from what I've seen in later footage of the game, you have to repair your knife at the immersion system, which is stupid. I don't know why you can't craft in order to repair your knife. But you see, like, there's also a break-free option, so they've basically given this the Resident Evil 3 remake treatment. Like, they've combined the Resident Evil 2 remake and the Resident Evil 3 remake designs for breaking out of grabs. So the break-free with mashing X is reused from Resident Evil 3 remake, and then the defense item aspect is reused from Resident Evil 2 remake. But Resident Evil 2 Remake has actually done one thing better than this game, and when you got grabbed in Resident Evil 2 Remake, you didn't take instant damage. Like, that made so much sense, but here you're already taking damage the moment the grab animation starts, before the enemy has even started to put pressure on Leon's neck. And it's the same in Resident Evil Village. In Resident Evil Village, if you watch my poor designs of Resident Evil Village Part 1 video, you will see the amount of times a Lycan has been able to touch me with his fingertips to start the grab, yet I've stopped the grab from happening and I've taken damage. And it doesn't help that at times the Lycans can do that running grab that is so fast, and just it can catch you for a split second. Like, the grab starts for a split second, you break out of it before the full damage is received, and you just take instant damage. Like, you're already down to caution level when you take that instant damage, and it's fucking retarded. It's the same shit with Resident Evil 6 as well. Resident Evil 6 had the same problem, and it was even more annoying in that game, because literally on no hope difficulty, the moment a zombie grabbed you, even before they had a chance to bite you, you would lose half of your life cubes, like sometimes 4 of your life cubes, and it was so retarded in that game. But, like, this was also a thing in Resident Evil 4 as well, in the original version, where the moment you got grabbed, you took instant damage. I don't understand why you're going to make the player take instant damage from a grab, but then you also introduce a defense item aspect. In every Resident Evil game that has a defense item, Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 2 Remake, you never took damage instantly from the enemy when they initiated their grab. If you had a defense item, you were safe. But here, they've completely neglected that rule to the defense items, and it's stupid. But anyway, we break out of this grab right here, and this guy's doing a lot of damage, and that is a lot of damage for easy difficulty, or is this normal difficulty? I'm astounded that that is a thing where you're going to be taking that high of damage on easy or normal difficulty, and I'm assuming the developers played this on easy difficulty, because in the village fight, like, some of the enemies are very passive, but I imagine that's an amateur difficulty thing, because it's the same thing in Resident Evil Village as well. But I'm guessing this guy is able to do high damage because he's a special enemy type. But Leon breaks out of the grab, and right here, I don't know why this guy is shooting the torso, but either way, there should have been some kind of stun generated. But I'm guessing, in this case, because the parasite has assumed control, torso shots don't really generate enough force in the correct area to elicit a believable stun. In the leg area, that would make a bit of sense. And the head area, not so much. But we see this guy shooting this enemy. He's still not flinching, and there's the grab again. So I imagine this guy, if they're bringing back the sprint counter in Resident Evil 4 Remake, you'd most likely treat this guy like it's Resident Evil 2 Remake, where you gotta walk forward to shift your hitbox forward, or like sprint towards him to actually initiate the sprint counter, and then you run away. Although I just wonder how the crouch is going to be a factor to consider in this case. Because most likely you'd be able to crouch under the grab. I mean, Resident Evil 7 had this. You could crouch under grabs in Resident Evil 7 whenever the molded did their stretchy arms in order to grab you. But of course, in Resident Evil Revelations 2, this didn't work because the hitboxes were broken in Resident Evil Revelations 2, and the developers didn't want to take advantage of the crouch that much in Resident Evil Revelations 2. But then you have a lot of games like even Evil Within, like, you crouch and you can't really avoid the grab because it's an actual active frame period on the entire body, not just with the arms. So I just wonder how crouching is going to be useful in this case. Leon clearly doesn't display the ability to block like Ethan Winters does. So I doubt crouching is going to serve much of a use against the grabs. But we'll have to see. If it does, that's mind-blowing and incredible. But right here is a stealth sequence, so this is where the player is taking advantage of the crouch. And you'll notice, did you see that right there? So Leon's flashlight is on, but then it turns off. So it seems like they're bringing in the ability to manually control the flashlight. And if that is the case, then most likely the enemies can see your flashlight. And Resident Evil Revelations 2 had this mechanic as well where the enemies could see your flashlight, but this was only ever the case with Moira, I believe, because the enemy types you fought, the Afflicted could recognize your flashlight, and also because the flashlight in Revelations 2, specifically with Moira's flashlight, could be used for the purpose of blinding, and because of the fact that it's actually counting as some form of damage against the enemies, that's why it could alert enemies in that game. But when you're playing as Barry, it was different. But I imagine here, if they're giving you the ability to manually turn off your flashlight, then most likely the enemies will be able to see your flashlight. And it makes sense given the intelligence of the Ganados compared to the zombies, because these enemies are a lot more lethal, a lot more dangerous, and a lot more intelligent compared to the zombies. That's how it is in the lore. That's what the Parasite delivers here. That's what the Las Plagas delivers. But I heard mention that you'd be able to do stealth attacks. So you have the ability to sneak up behind enemies and do a stealth attack on them, and it drains your durability on the knife. And that's a cool idea, but it's silly to think about because Resident Evil 2 Remake had stealth with the zombies. Like in Resident Evil 2 Remake, zombies were in a stealth status, and you could actually like walk behind zombies and they wouldn't recognize you. They wouldn't know you were there. As soon as they saw you, that's when they would actually attack you, or if they heard a noise. But you didn't have the ability to stealth attack enemies, and I believe the developers of Resident Evil 2 Remake made a joke about this. I remember some guy asking, can you actually use your knife to stab the zombies from behind? And they're like, nope, because why bother being a believable survivor in this case? Why bother embracing common sense when it comes to stealth? And apparently, having years of intense training is what allows you to do stealth attacks against the enemies with your knife, even if the enemies are brain dead. That just seems very silly to me, just hearing that with this game, which is built off the RE engine, and it's being handled by the same team that handled Resident Evil 2 Remake. So that's why it comes across as weird to me and just silly to me. But there's the Ganada right there. He's going to go off to the left, but it's going to fade at a certain point. And then this is where we get this cutscene right over here. So here, Leon is able to find information on Ashley. So it's clear that each of the individual villagers, they're keeping tabs on Ashley and other things. Or is this supposed to be Torres Mendez's mansion? Maybe this is Torres Mendez's mansion, actually. That would make a bit of sense, because he's the big cheese of this village. So it makes sense that he would have information on Ashley. But we see this. So you see Lago. So Del Lago is back in this game, and then we have whatever that is, Valde Lobo. I don't know what that is, but you see Ashley is tied up. I wonder why they took photographs of her. And also, the Los Iluminados, they abducted Ashley to be a sleeper agent. Like, they were going to inject her with the Las Plagas and then send her back to the US to be a sleeper agent for them to ambush the president. But then why would they advertise this to Leon and Ashley and then try to stop them from escaping? Like, they should have just given Ashley to Leon, and then that would actually allow them to fulfill their plan of embedding the sleeper agent into the government. But maybe what's going to happen is when they're giving the orders to stop Leon and Ashley from escaping, maybe they're saying those orders before they've been injected with the Plaga. If they've actually, although even still that wouldn't make any sense if they're still trying to stop Leon and Ashley from escaping. But maybe what they'll do is they'll actually... Oh, you know what? Maybe that actually makes sense. Maybe what they're doing in Resident Evil 4, the original, is they're keeping Ashley in captivity to allow the parasite to mature. And through this maturation process that allows the parasite to eventually take control, because it starts out from an egg. Like, I think what they're doing is they're trying to... Yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense. I don't know why people say that... It's bizarre that the Los Iluminados would try to stop them from escaping when the parasite hasn't even matured yet. Like, it hasn't actually gotten to the nervous system yet. So I assume what they're doing is they're waiting for Ashley to be overtaken by the parasite before sending her in as a sleeper agent. That would make a bit of sense. And they're trying to stop Leon and Ashley from escaping so that they could then like stop them from informing the president, or by finding some other way to remove the parasite. That makes sense. Of course, the part where Sadler explains his plan to Leon doesn't really make a lot of sense. But maybe it's something different here. I'm hoping they correct that in this remake.
Bruce, this is Gondor 1.
Hunnigan here. What's your sit rep?
Like, again, the serious tone that Leon is displaying here, and then he's talking with Hunnigan, it's reminiscent to Resident Evil Degeneration with its portrayal, and I like that.
President's daughter, Baby Eagle. It's likely she's in this village.
Our intel was correct then. Well done.
Something's happened to the people here. My escorts are...
Yeah, so it makes sense that Leon would say that after he's actually dealt with the first villager. And these three guys are coming, so rather than actually jumping out the window and then fighting them, it seems like they're going to be in this cutscene instead.
Gotta go.
And so they're
Talk
coming
later.
through, and then Leon busts through the window to escape them. And there we go. So that's the end of that. And then we have this, the iconic village fight. Now, I doubt you can do this stealthily, because I imagine the developers would be that rigid in their mentality, and that they want you to do this in combat rather than stealth. Because, like, in Resident Evil Village, the same thing is also the case. You know, you have all these Lycans prowling around, and they're just staying on the rooftops, just observing you. And then eventually they come down, and as soon as you go inside of a building, or you actually shoot one of them, they attack you, so you can't, like, sneak past them or anything. It's probably going to be the same case here. In fact, speaking of stealth, I wonder if there's going to be some kind of last known position mechanic that allows you to escape the enemies. Because in Resident Evil Revelations 2, they didn't have this. The only thing that was parallel to the idea of a last known position mechanic was going through a loading door and then going back into the room to de-aggro the enemies. I mean, sometimes this wouldn't work if the enemies were close to you, or sometimes it was just a mandatory combat encounter whenever you just re-entered the room through the loading door. But I don't think new Capcom is clever enough to put in a last known position mechanic. It wouldn't make sense. But given the fact that the knife has durability on this game, would having a last known position mechanic be that much of an advantage? What I'm posing here makes sense logically to have a last known position mechanic. But I don't see them doing that, because new Capcom doesn't have any sense with their games nowadays. And we get this binocular scene, just like in the original version of Resident Evil 4, and these villagers are burning this officer to the stake, just like they did in the original version, and we get to see it actually happen, rather than seeing the aftermath of it. And now this is where the combat begins, and this player doesn't do the best job at showcasing the mechanics. Doesn't showcase all of them. But right here, you see that there are some flinch animations, but I'm not gonna buy for a second that new Capcom is actually respecting their animation department right here. Because of the fact that this is played on either easy difficulty or normal difficulty, it's not representative of the final product. It's not going to be representative of what new Capcom actually views this game as. Because using Resident Evil Village as a reference point, and Resident Evil Village is the biggest reference point you'll want to use when talking about the state of Resident Evil 4 Remake, Village of Shadows difficulty was fucking stupid. It was the worst difficulty mode ever introduced in the Resident Evil series by far. And new Capcom displayed no common sense when even designing that difficulty mode. And the additions / removals that they did with Village of Shadows difficulty for its modifiers were just disrespectful to the animation department as a whole, and to the very core of combat, or to the very core of creativity. And you will not believe the amount of flinch animations that Resident Evil Village's Village of Shadows difficulty removed. So if you're playing Resident Evil Village on easy, normal, or hardcore difficulty, and I played Resident Evil Village on hardcore difficulty for my blind playthrough because I was forced to unlock Village of Shadows difficulty, I was given a false experience. I was led astray to believe that new Capcom actually embraced animations and the like, but no, they turned all of that off on Village of Shadows difficulty. They removed so many flinch animations. They removed any sense of stuns with the enemies. Even the most fundamental flinch animations that help balance gameplay, they removed those. And you were forced to rely upon exploits like crazy to deliver like a satisfactory experience, like an experience that actually worked. And this was a massive shot to the foot for new Capcom, and they followed this trend for so many parts of Resident Evil Village. And they forced the immersion upon you like crazy in Resident Evil Village, and that was probably one of the main reasons for that. They probably removed so many flinch animations to force you to use the immersion system, to make it such an integral part to the fundamental flow of gameplay, and that just makes it on par with a microtransaction system with the immersion system in Resident Evil Village. And I'm going to talk more about the merchant system in Resident Evil 4 Remake when I get to the part where they showcase the merchant. But again, just reiterating on my initial point with this, you might look at these flinch animations and say that this is what new Capcom is actually valuing, but when you go to the harder difficulties, I guarantee you they are going to not pay any respect to the original version of Resident Evil 4, or to just a game in general. They will create a stripped-down version of this game that feels more like an alpha for the hardest difficulty, and the hardest difficulty is what represents the developer's true mindset. And it's a survival horror game, so harder difficulties are meant to encapsulate on this. They're supposed to be representative of what a survival horror experience is, with putting stress on the player. And new Capcom has some of the most bizarre ideas for difficulty, and removing flinch animations, like even the most critical of flinch animations that promote creativity and actually promote balance and actually deliver very interesting gameplay. That's their idea of like survival horror gameplay. That's their idea of making the game scary. Well, all you've done is just force the player to look at the section like it's a game, take advantage of holes in your AI systems, take advantage of holes in the environment, and you've created a fucking alpha. That's what you've done. And they didn't bother being creative at all because they wanted to be so half-baked with their attempts with designing Resident Evil Village that it's seriously fucking retarded. And Resident Evil Village on Village of Shadows difficulty barely feels like a survival horror game. It feels more like a badly designed RPG game with Village of Shadows difficulty, and that's what new Capcom views as survival horror? Are you fucking serious? That right there is so retarded, and I imagine this game will emulate those ideas as well. So I don't trust the flinch animations for 1 second. But it looks cool either way. And this guy gets grabbed, so he's just going to break out rather than use his knife. There's the kick, and also right here, there's the headshot, so that opens that enemy up to being susceptible to Leon's melee. And I actually thought before Resident Evil 4 Remake came out that they would remove Leon's melee because, again, new Capcom can't think independently of their idiotic fan base, and they're practically emulating their idiotic fan base's opinions of Resident Evil 4. And so many idiotic fans think that the melee system in Resident Evil 4 Original is contradictory to the very idea of survival horror. But the reason why they introduced the melee in the original version of Resident Evil 4 is because you were dealing with a large number of enemies, and the melee was there to balance out any potential bad designs that might be present with the enemies. There's a reason you got iframes. There's a reason why you knock back enemies. It's to allow you to stand your ground and not make the game feel like it's a badly coordinated dance. And furthermore, the whole idea of the melee is complementary to survival horror because favoring the whole idea of melee is what complements the very idea of trying to be intelligent with saving your resources. Using your melee as a way to save your resources is crucial for future progress through Resident Evil 4 or for any other games. Like, I've said this before, but I feel like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 feel more like survival horror games than the original Resident Evil games, because knife only was heavily encouraged so much in those games that why bother worrying about ammunition? Like, if knife only is going to be your core design for the older Resident Evil games, then why bother worrying about ammunition? Why bother worrying about your shitty inventory system, which is already poorly designed? And thank God knife only completely allows you to not worry about the shitty inventory system because of how unrealistic it's designed. Like, the melee system is there to give players like myself, people who understand Resident Evil, the chance to save on their ammunition in other creative ways. And furthermore, the melee is there to serve as a character trait. It's to showcase Leon's development from Resident Evil 2 to now. I mean, the guy has gone through years of intense training, and you want him to be on par with the Resident Evil 1 remake characters who have these like training capabilities in stars, all this experience within stars, and he can't handle a simple zombie. And why would you not even go in and punish a flinch animation with a melee attack? Like, any reasonable survivor would understand that they have dire ammunition, like very small amounts of ammunition, and they have to think of creative ways to save up on their ammo, so they make an enemy flinch, and then they retaliate with some kind of melee attack. Sebastian, for instance, Sebastian in The Evil Within, he threw bottles at enemies' heads, and he meleeed with his knife to save up on his ammunition. But apparently that's not survival horror. Like, people come up with the most ridiculous explanations and ridiculous logic when designating a game as being survival horror or not. Like, oh, but this game has this one mechanic that represents like a small portion of the game. Oh, it's not a survival horror game. Oh, this game is not third person. It's not a survival horror game. That's how fucked up the mentalities are with these dumb Resident Evil players. But anyway, there's the melee. And did you see that just then? So this is something I noticed a lot in this gameplay trailer. The stumble mechanic. So if you don't know, the stumble mechanic in Resident Evil 4, this was first introduced in Resident Evil 4, but you could kick enemies into other enemies, and when you kicked enemies away from you, their body could be used to knock back other enemies. It would cause them to stumble in that game. And this is also the case when you're using the shotgun, and when you launched enemies away with the shotgun, their body could be used to knock enemies around, to make them stumble. And this was important because the enemies in Resident Evil 4 could attack you during the melee attack animations, even though you got iframes. And so having a stumble mechanic was necessary to ensure that the enemies didn't immediately ambush you the moment you got out of the melee. And if the enemies are going to ambush you the moment you get out of the melee, then it disincentivizes you from even partaking in the melee. And so it makes the mechanic feel very pointless. I mean, in cases like Resident Evil 6, there were a lot of situations where the enemies ambushed you during the animations or just when you got out of the animations, and so you had to be very reserved with your melee or with your counters, this and that. It was pretty dumb in that game. But it's a great idea. Like, it allows you to get your bearings on where you are, and it's one of the most intelligent design choices in Resident Evil 4, especially when that game was designed for the tank controls in mind. But I feel like with this game, they've expanded upon the stumble mechanic, and again, they'll probably remove the stumble mechanic on the highest difficulties, which will be fucking retarded, so I can't really say much about this. Like, again, it might seem like I'm being, like, jaded right now, but I'm just being realistic right now, because Resident Evil Village as a reference point, it makes a lot of sense, because that game was originally considered to be a game inspired by Resident Evil 4, and they insulted Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 heavily with that game. That's why I'm being realistic right now, not jaded. And you know, that's why I can't really like look at these stumble mechanics and then consider them cool when they're going to remove them on the highest difficulty. I have to assume that this game is going to play like an alpha, like an unfinished product on the highest difficulty, which will be what the developers value. And they're lying to their fans when they're saying that they value these kind of animations, these kind of gameplay mechanics, this kind of creativity. And it's very scummy as a developer to do that. But if you saw just then, so, like, let me just rewind this again. So watch. He shoots this enemy, but then watch this. Her body, when she collides with this enemy, he stumbled. So this was not a thing in the original version of Resident Evil 4. In the original version of Resident Evil 4, flinch animations generated by your pistol or any kind of, like, small weapon like this, like any kind of weapon that wasn't a shotgun, these kind of weapons, when they generate these kind of flinch animations, the flinch animations that the enemies were put into did not make the enemies flinch. But in this game, they do. And that's really cool. That's really well designed right there. But again, I can't say it's well designed because they'll remove this on the highest difficulty. In fact, I'm hoping with this game, you can play the highest difficulty from the start. I don't want to play through the earlier difficulties in order to unlock the highest difficulty. I want the true experience. I want the experience that the developers consider to be the true experience, which is their highest difficulty. I want to synchronize with their mindset and their mentalities and their beliefs on what they truly value when it comes to this game. And that is why I want to play the highest difficulty from the start, so that I can understand if mechanics like this are actually in the highest difficulty. And if they're not, that's fucking retarded, and new Capcom is lying to your face right now with this gameplay. But moving on, so right there, keen-eyed Resident Evil 4 players might have noticed this, but in the original version of Resident Evil 4, the actual kick that Leon did, like the standard kick when you shot enemies in the head and you press square, Leon did a roundhouse kick, but in this game, he does a reverse roundhouse kick. So he does the same animation from Resident Evil 6. Only on this game, just the way it looks, just the way like the sound effect is, just the way the enemies are launched back, and they just get knocked to the ground, they've made it more grounded in its interpretation, which is nice. It's a small thing, it's not that big of a deal, but, I thought I'd note it. And also on this game, you have the ability to finish off enemies on the ground, and they showcase this at a later point in this gameplay. But I'll get to it when I get the chance. So we move inside of this house right here, and you might notice, but Leon moves kind of slowly for his sprint animation. And I don't know which is slower. I don't know if Resident Evil 2 Remake's movement, like just the sprint animation in general, is slower compared to how it is in Resident Evil 4 Remake, because I could tell with the likes of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, especially with the third-person mode for Resident Evil Village, Ethan moves a lot faster than Leon does when he's sprinting. So, interesting thing to note right there, but I imagine it's meant to emulate the similar kind of sprint speed that was the case with Resident Evil 4 when you had a gun out. And Resident Evil 4 and 5 were those games where the weapon that you had out affected your sprint speed. So if you had a pistol out, you would move slower. But if you had no weapon out or you had grenades out, you would move a lot faster. And it seems like the sprint speed for this game is similar to Leon's sprint speed when he's holding his pistol out and he's just sprinting like usual in the original version of Resident Evil 4. It's not that big of a deal. I don't care if the movement looks very slow, because I'll get used to it. I mean, a lot of people say Ethan Winters is so slow, but what the fuck are they talking about? Ethan's like the fastest character I've ever seen. I mean, if you're talking about sprint speed, that's really stupid. But this right here is an interesting environmental choice that they decided to put in with this remake. So this wasn't in the original version of Resident Evil 4, but you have the ability to set this cow on fire. So they brought the cow back, but you can now set it on fire, and it runs into the enemies, which is cool. But moving on, we have this. So you see right here, the enemies are very passive, so I can tell this is on amateur difficulty, because this same level of passivity is the same level of passivity that was present in Resident Evil Village on amateur difficulty. And it's pretty shameful that the developers would play this game on amateur to try to advertise a false experience. But I don't know why developers nowadays can't just play these games on the highest difficulty if they're trying to showcase the true survival horror experience, or just showcase the true mentalities of the game overall. But, it doesn't bother me at all. It makes sense why the enemies are designed the way they are, because, it's in the framework of a game. You yourself have limited capabilities compared to how Leon would be in real life. And so if you're going to be limited, then the enemies have to be limited. It's not worth explanation. But we go inside of here. So the mantle animation over the fence is there. I don't think you get iframes during this animation. I mean, it feels like they wouldn't give you iframes during this animation. I mean, in Resident Evil Village, you didn't get iframes when you're mantling. So I imagine the same design will be present here. I mean, then again, when you consider the fact that each Resident Evil game is heralded by a different development team, although I think in this case, the Division 1 team that handled Resident Evil Village is the same team that is handling Resident Evil 4 Remake. I believe they said that certain portions of the Resident Evil 2 Remake team, I think primarily it's the Resident Evil 2 Remake team that is handling this game. I mean, they said Division 1 is handling it, but I think certain portions of the Resident Evil 2 Remake team and the Resident Evil Village team are handling this game. Yet, the director of this game, Ampo-san, directed Resident Evil 5. However, he was one of the sub-directors for Resident Evil 2 Remake, as a subscriber of mine pointed out. So that is concerning that he could degenerate like that, just going from Resident Evil 5, which was a fantastic game, to a shit game like Resident Evil 4 Remake. But I mean, Kadoi-san was the main director for Resident Evil 2 Remake, and he mentioned that Resident Evil 2 Remake was the very first game he ever directed. So it's clear his lack of experience is really showing in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But hopefully, with Ampo-san being the primary director of Resident Evil 4 Remake, his experience, like his prior experience, will actually serve as a better baseline for the designs put in place in this game. But we go inside of here, which triggers a cutscene. I mean, same thing in Resident Evil 4, but in Resident Evil 4, it was a pre-rendered cutscene. This, it's more of an in-game cutscene. Of course, I'm not going to go inside of here, because in the original version of Resident Evil 4, going inside of here spawned the Chainsaw Man. Or when you went to one of the gates, there was one particular gate that spawned the Chainsaw Man in. And in the original version of Resident Evil 4, I just stand my ground, and I don't go inside of this building, because I don't want to spawn in the Chainsaw Man. And I wonder if that same design still holds true here, where if you avoid going inside this house entirely, you will prevent the Chainsaw Man from spawning in. And just think as well, in the Separate Ways DLC for Resident Evil 4, Ada Wong was apparently here while Leon was under siege by these villagers, which makes absolutely no sense. So I wonder if they're going to refine that. In fact, I honestly wonder if they're going to implement Leon and Ada into the same campaign. Like, this entire game is going to be one continuous experience where you get to swap between Leon and Ada, similar to Resident Evil Dead Aim, where you swap between Bruce and Feng Ling. I think that's what her name was. So, like, it's just one continuous campaign where you swap between the characters. And I think that was the original intention with Resident Evil 2 Remake as well. Originally, I believe Resident Evil 2 Remake was going to be one continuous campaign where you just swap between Leon and Claire. But they decided to favor the shitty scenario design, and so there's a lot of time lapses and chronology of events that don't make any sense whatsoever, and just the way time progresses in Resident Evil 2 Remake doesn't make any sense when you're factoring in the scenario design. And, like, how could G1 Birkin be here when he was already taken out by Leon and Claire is now fighting him again? Like, stuff like that doesn't make any sense with the scenario design in Resident Evil 2 Remake. And I'm just hoping it'll be something like that. I don't want a DLC pack where Ada's like path through the environments somehow intersects with Leon in a very strange way. I want it to be like one continuous campaign where we swap between Leon and Ada. Similar to how it was in Leon's campaign and Claire's campaign in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Like in Leon's campaign, you seamlessly swap between Leon and Ada within the same campaign. And then in Claire's campaign, you seamlessly swap between Claire and Sherry in the same campaign. Like, I'm hoping it's something like that. That would make a bit more sense. But there's the Chainsaw Man. He looks a lot more ferocious in this game, which I do appreciate. However, I do have a bit of a problem with the Ganado portrayals in this game. But I'll explain more when I get the chance. Yeah, he's breaking through now, so I think in the original version of Resident Evil 4, the Chainsaw Man could get through the door instantly. I don't remember what it was like, because I've never gone into this house in the original version of Resident Evil 4. But it looks like the same thing. So the Chainsaw Man, he's taking a certain amount of time to break down the door. And also, we have the shotgun here, so you still get the shotgun from the same spot. And then right here, the Chainsaw Man is broken through. So as expected, he doesn't flinch because he's like high on steroids or something. Like, he's so pumped up by the Las Plagas because his mutation is so extreme that he's more resilient to flinch animations. Of course, in Resident Evil 4, if you knifed the Chainsaw Man in his head, you would get a guaranteed stun on him. But when you were using your pistol, it took a couple of shots to his head to make him flinch. And also, one thing that was really, really cool in Resident Evil 4, and this was not the case in Resident Evil 5 for whatever bizarre reason, the shotgun could actually knock down Chainsaw Man in Resident Evil 4. It made so much sense. It makes total sense for a shotgun to do that. But I imagine in this game, because of the fact that it's favoring more complex animation styles, which has heavily been the case with all games ever since the advent of Resident Evil 4, the shotgun is not going to knock over this guy. It's going to be similar to how it is in Resident Evil 5. That's what I'm assuming is going to be the case, because I expect that kind of half-baked design from new Capcom. especially on the highest difficulty, where they'll most likely remove the shotgun flinch animations. If you remember how in hardcore difficulty for Resident Evil Village, or like even in the lower difficulties, the shotgun could actually knock over the lichens regardless of what body part you shot. I mean, sometimes you shoot them in the arms on accident and it would do the wrong flinch animation, but you could shoot them in their torso and it would knock them back, and it made so much sense, and it was so balanced, this and that. But then you have Village of Shadows difficulty, which completely removed that stun, so the lichens, for some reason, no longer get knocked down by the shotgun unless you aim for their head at point-blank range. And this opens the game up to a lot of holes, because where the pellets go is random, and if the pellets prioritize the wrong body part, or your reticle is off even a slight amount from the head, they would trigger the wrong flinch animation, and if they did a very quick flinch animation, they would immediately grab you, because the movement in Resident Evil Village was shit. And it's one of the worst movement systems I've ever seen for a Resident Evil game. I don't know what's worse, the movement system in Resident Evil 2 Remake, or the movement system in Resident Evil Village. But and you see that just then? So you have the ability to counter the Chainsaw Man, and the player actually does this at the end of this demo right here. That's really cool. But I'm not going to be using it because I'm trying to preserve my knife durability, because as a skilled tactician like myself, someone who is heavily resonant with the very idea of survival horror, and just being like a true survivor, this and that, I have to be very smart about when I use my knife and when I use my melee. So I'm not going to waste time with this. And plus, this mechanic, while it is cool for a quick getaway, I feel like it's tailored more towards people who suck at the game, or just going to be taking damage a lot. And so this mechanic is cool for that purpose, and I'm glad it's in the game. That is a pretty cool design, but still nowhere near as cool as Ethan stopping Mia's chainsaw with his hands. That really says a lot when Leon has to use a knife to block a chainsaw, when Ethan literally grabs the handle of the chainsaw and stops it from slashing him, and then he kicks Mia away. That right there is more badass compared to what Leon goes through. But I imagine it'd be very high octane and really feel epic in that moment. But that right there is interesting. It's a very interesting design choice, and this game actually has a counter system, but I'll go into it a bit more. Right here is interesting. So that right there, I was not expecting this to be the case. So they've added the stumble mechanic to the mantle animation, and it was the same case in the original version of Resident Evil 4. Mantling into enemies caused them to flinch. This was something I was not expecting from this incompetent team at New Capcom, but they actually brought it here. And again, they'll most likely remove these animations on the highest difficulty, whatever it may be. I doubt the highest difficulty is going to be professional difficulty, because they favor this trend now where they have to add in a higher difficulty after playing the earlier difficulties, and it's going to be so retarded when they remove this. And it's stuff like this that allows you to not be cheap shot by the enemies. And at least they had a bit of sense here on the easier difficulties, but on the hardest difficulties, they remove all common sense. And when this woman breaks through the window, she will not be flinched by the mantle animation, which is fucking retarded. But this right here, this is another thing I really like about this game. This quick select menu, this is definitely built to stop players from having their immersion ruined by the inventory system. I cannot tell you how jarring it is to have to go into your inventory every single time and just pause the game to then like select an item in your inventory, like to select a weapon to equip. It was so jarring. I mean, I originally didn't think anything of it, but after playing like Resident Evil 7, it has put Resident Evil 4 into a new perspective, and I do not like the inventory system in Resident Evil 4, or just the way you select items or weaponry. And it's just, it definitely allows you to stay safe in the inventory so that you can then swap weapons seamlessly, this and that. But is it really seamless when you're just interrupting your experience like this? It's like going into I had an analogy for this, but I can't remember what it was. But all I'll say is I'm glad that they're being smart and they're not trying to screw your immersion into the game by forcing you to go into the inventory every single time to actually like swap to a weapon or anything like that. Like, they're actually implementing this feature within the real-time gameplay, which is nice. And this is structured very similarly to Last of Us's inventory. And it seems like you can assign a weapon to any part of the inventory, so that's nice. So it's not just they've reserved the horizontal bar for weapons and then the vertical bar is just your sub-weapons. They've actually made it where you can select what you actually want to put into this quick select tab right here, which is really nice. But we get this one right here. I gotta say, guys, I'm really glad that the music is different. Like, I honestly feel like with the changes that they've made to the aesthetic with the village and just the music choice overall, I feel like it's made the village encounter a lot more scary and a lot more hectic and a lot more intense compared to the original version of Resident Evil 4. Like, it's just a shame that in the original version of Resident Evil 4, they didn't really change the music for the village encounter to be very different to the standard Ganado encounter theme. And I didn't feel like it was that serviceable for a very hectic village encounter. But it looks like they're compensating for that with this game, which is nice. And I really enjoy this. I really feel the heart-racing moments of this village encounter thanks to the change of the aesthetic with the village and with the music choices. I don't buy for a second that that Chainsaw Man flinched. It's hard to see, but I don't think he flinched from that. And do you see that just then? Look at the bottom right of the screen. Do you see that? So, like I said before, this game does have a counter mechanic. It's not just specific to the Chainsaw Man. It's specific to many attacks. And I remember Ether telling me this as well, but I didn't think of it at the time. But Ether remembers seeing comments for this gameplay saying that it was really cool that Resident Evil's finally giving you the ability to put in this kind of counter system. But these idiots don't realize that Resident Evil 6 had the same counter system. Only in this game, you have to use your knife to counter, and I don't know if countering with your knife decreases its durability. I know when you stab enemies, it decreases the durability, but you can pretty much do the counter for every single basic attack pretty much. And that's pretty cool. And once again, it highlights the development of Leon's character starting from Resident Evil 2 Remake and onward. And it shows his level of training with actually dealing with these kind of Ganado. And when a character's capability is increased like this, it means that the threats he faces are going to be deadly. Like, the chances of meeting a very deadly BOW are going to be high for these kind of skilled characters. That's what people don't realize. Like, the older Resident Evil games, can you really consider any of the enemies to be lethal or anything like that? They were just very dumb enemies, very simplistically designed enemies, and it was all because of the fact that your own character's capabilities were so, like, neutered and just so watered down that they had to compensate for that by making the enemy shit in those games. But they're still bullshit either way. But most likely with the inclusion of this counter mechanic, it means that there's going to be a wide variety of deadly attacks. But again, all of that is going to be meaningless because I know for sure they will remove this mechanic on the highest difficulty. Like I said, they want to favor a stripped down, watered down, alpha version of the game for the highest difficulty because that's somehow survival horror gameplay, which is fucking retarded. But based on my own interpretation of this counter mechanic, I imagine the counter window to be very similar to Resident Evil 6's counter window. And Resident Evil 6's counter window was pretty accurate. I mean, sometimes it was pretty lenient, and that definitely helped in ensuring that certain attacks worked as intended, like certain counters worked as intended, and there wasn't any ambiguity on the detection, so they had to make the counters very generous, because Resident Evil 6 overall is a very broken game, and for it to have generous counters was good. But hopefully this game doesn't have the same level of broken designs like Resident Evil 6. And they actually understand the implementation of the counter. And I think another problem as well is that typically with these remakes, whenever they introduce these kind of mechanics like dodging or countering, they're usually very shit. I mean, remember the dodge system from Resident Evil 3 Remake? I mean, admittedly, the dodge system in Resident Evil 3 Remake is way better than the dodge system from Resident Evil 3 Original, because the amount of times Jill got attacked while dodging, and it was only ever effective against zombies. That's pretty stupid in the original version of Resident Evil 3. But I don't encounter that so much in Resident Evil 3 Remake. However, I do encounter enemies just spamming grab like crazy even after I've dodged. Like the same enemy that I dodged, he's able to banana grab and just flip around and immediately grab me with that second grab on hardcore difficulty or up to infernal difficulty. And it's really retarded. And, you know, I expect that level of idiocy on new Capcom's part, so I imagine there's going to be some kind of hole or problem with the counter mechanic on this game. And I'll know for sure when this game actually gets a demo and actually experiment a bit with this counter mechanic. And that's another thing as well with demos. You think they're going to time the demos for this game? Because for some reason, new Capcom has been favoring this trend of timing the demos. And remember how fragmented and poorly implemented the timed demos were for Resident Evil Village? I mean, some of the demos unlocked at like 3 a.m., for instance, and that's when you're sleeping. Or a lot of the times the demos unlock during work periods. Like, this poor coordination on new Capcom's part when distributing the timed demo for Resident Evil Village. Why the fuck would they repeat the same thing? And the third-person demo for Resident Evil Village, which is the most recent demo for Resident Evil Village, a year after its release, it's timed. So they're still favoring the time demo aspect because for some reason they think it actually inspires a lot of love for the game, a lot of intrigue for the game. When you know what my experience was when I was trying to play the demos for Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil Village? I had to create multiple accounts. I had to ask my friends for their accounts in order to actually play the demos again. And I feel like the reason why they implement these timed demos is not only because of the fact that these demos are slices from the final cut of the game, but they want to limit your exposure and analysis of these demos so that you aren't aware of the problems and holes present with the gameplay. If you are an analyst such as myself, these timed demos prevent me from actually analyzing them properly. That's what they're trying to do right here. And I feel like that is a very scummy business practice right there. Like, they're able to sell a broken product, but then limit the time spent in it so that you don't realize you are playing a broken experience. That's what these time demos feel like. And they repeat the same thing for Resident Evil 4 Remake, which they will most undoubtedly do because this team that is handling Resident Evil 4 Remake is the same team that handled Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil Village. And they introduced this time demo format. This game is going to be shit. I know it's going to be shit. Because this just seems to be a trend with me. Like, the time demos for Resident Evil 2 Remake was bad. Resident Evil Village's time demos, they left a very sour impression for Resident Evil Village. And lo and behold, that sour impression came true with the entirety of Resident Evil Village. And it's going to be the same case here with Resident Evil 4 Remake if they introduce time demos again. But there's a hit. And this right here, I'm surprised they brought back this mechanic. So whenever enemies grab you from behind and they put you into this animation, you do not take any damage. So that's interesting. I'm amazed that they would bring that back. I did not expect new Capcom to have the foresight to do that. But you'll see right here, the Chainsaw Man, you see him doing that running attack? So they've reused that animation from Revelations 2. Mutant Pedro was the first character to do this. And he did the exact same running attack with the chainsaw. Or with the drill that he was using. So they've taken this animation from Revelations 2 and they put it in this game. And it's not just with the Chainsaw Man. The guys with the pitchforks do the exact same animation as well. So, interesting how this game is borrowing some mechanics from Revelations 2. Maybe this game should have been the Revelations 3, but it eventually became Resident Evil 4 Remake. And I know such rumors were also the case with Resident Evil Village, where Resident Evil Village was originally rumored to be a Revelations 3, but one of my subscribers, Polkit Sharma, mentioned that was fake. But even to this day, I still feel like Resident Evil Village is a Revelations 3 with its poor quality and with some of its ideas that feel inspired by the Revelations series, just in a very poor manner. Well, at least it's better than Resident Evil Revelations 2, that's what I'll say. I don't know if Resident Evil Village is better than Revelations 1, though. I mean, maybe it is, based on, like, the length of that game and, you know, like, Resident Evil Actually, no, I think that's too quick to jump to conclusions like that. But you'll see right here, before this guy even gets the chance to impale Leon, he breaks out of the grab, and a stumble animation is triggered. So that right there is good design. So they've reused this mechanic from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5. But when you're breaking out of grabs, the enemies... Actually, no, not so much in Resident Evil 4. In Resident Evil 5. So what happens is, when you break out of grabs in Resident Evil 5, and this only applied when you were in those cinematic grabs, where, like, for instance, and then, like, a normal Majini, for instance, would grab you, and then Chris is grabbing his hands and trying to force him away, this and that. Like, when you go into those animations, or actually, no, just in any grab animation in general, when you broke out of the animation, the enemies gave you a grace period so that they didn't ambush you immediately, and it was so well designed in that game. It was very intelligent, and it seems like it's the same case here. So I'm thinking Anpo-san, because he was the director of Resident Evil 5, I feel like he's bringing in some good designs from Resident Evil 5 and implementing it into this game so that you're not getting cheap shot by these enemies. And, like, a lot of people don't understand the importance of this, but, like, if you're going to immediately get cheap shot by the enemies when you break out of a grab, why do you bother having a grab escape animation anyway? You might as well just make it where I die the moment I get grabbed if I'm going to immediately get killed by an enemy when they just ambush me when I get out of the grab. That right there is common sense, but the fucking idiots don't understand that. And here we go. So he throws the enemy away, and you'll notice that the animation is different now. So whenever Leon got grabbed from behind and he broke out of the grab in the original version of Resident Evil 4, he would do this really powerful elbow jab where he would elbow the enemy that was behind him and who was grabbing him. And a lot of the times that animation could kill enemies. In Resident Evil 5, it was neutered. It was made effeminate. Chris's elbow that he does when he's shaking off enemies, it doesn't work. It doesn't kill the enemies very effectively. It does very little damage, which is stupid. But Leon's back elbow jab, when he's breaking out of grabs, very powerful in Resident Evil 4, but they've changed the animation now. So he throws the enemy to the ground, and then he has the ability to follow up with a knife attack, which you'll see near the end of this demo. But that right there is very close. Most likely the Chainsaw Man's going to be an instant kill on this guy, regardless of difficulty. So once again, you see how the enemies are standing around? This is because of the grace period I was mentioning. The grace period from Resident Evil 5 is back in this game, which is intelligent. Of course, on the highest difficulty, they'll likely remove this, which is fucking retarded. I'm expecting this from an idiotic development team, like Resident Evil Village's development team. And also, you saw the melee symbol just then. You see how that arrow is above the enemy that's on the ground? That means I can stab them. And I wonder if, most likely there's not going to be friendly fire for the enemies on this game, but you see how the Chainsaw Man is just violently slashing, like he's just wildly slashing like an animal? Similar to what the Chainsaw Man did in Resident Evil 5, where you incapacitate the Chainsaw Man, and then he gets back up, and he goes into that final phase, where he just is wildly slashing with his chainsaw, which is one of the most broken attacks in that game, because if he catches you out with that attack, and your partner tries to revive you, he's busy like swinging his chainsaw while you're in that healing animation, and you can instantly die, which is retarded. And it was similar with Wesker as well. Wesker in the Lost in Nightmares DLC had the same problem. Do you have any idea the amount of times Wesker would be attacking me while I'm reviving Jill, and he would just immediately damage Jill the moment the animation was finished, and I revive her again, and he's in the middle of attacking me? So fucking retarded those developers were when designing that DLC, and they were designing Wesker's fight. And Lost in Nightmares DLC, it's average, but the final boss fight with Wesker in that DLC is dumb on so many levels. But I just wonder if this Chainsaw Man, when he's just wildly swinging with his chainsaw, can he damage other enemies? I mean, in Resident Evil 6, you Beast Folk could damage other enemies, and it was pretty useful in that game. But in Resident Evil 5, the Chainsaw Man could not damage other enemies. Same case in Resident Evil 4. And I imagine, in order to contribute to half-baked design, they'll make it where the Chainsaw Man can damage these enemies. And it's just going to make absolutely no sense. And it will not contribute to strategic play whatsoever. Like, if they're going to emphasize ammo management so much in this game, then give us these kind of options that allow us to not be so reliant upon the merchant system. I mean, look at Evil Within, for instance. Evil Within has an upgrade system, but it's not forced upon you. They have so many diverse options within the gameplay that allow you to circumvent the upgrade system and prevent the game from feeling like a microtransaction system. Like, you could use traps in the environment. You could use your guns. You could use your matches. You could use axes. You could use torches from the enemies. Like, whenever the enemies dropped axes or torches in that game, you could use them to your advantage. And I'm honestly amazed that there hasn't been a Resident Evil game where you can pick up an enemy's weapon and use it to your advantage. And this was something that I thought would be in Resident Evil Village, but it wasn't. And there's nothing like this in Resident Evil 4 Remake, most likely, which is dumb. And they'll most likely force the merchant upon you. They'll strip down the gameplay so bare to force you to use the merchant system. They won't allow you to be very strategic with enemy types like this, to allow you to use the Chainsaw Man to kill the enemies. Like, using Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Remake, for instance, I mean, Nemesis could kill enemies. But the Tyrant in Resident Evil 2 Remake didn't do that. He just shoved them aside like he was afraid to actually kill them because he's a pussy on that game. And if you could use the Tyrant intelligently to save up on your ammunition, that would have made that game so much more interesting. And you could avoid so much bullshit. But they didn't in that game, and it's dumb. There's a shotgun stun that they'll most likely neglect on the highest difficulty. And he gets grabbed again. But this time he showcases the grab escape. And once again, this animation is so pointless because you take instant damage before the enemy has even begun the whole process of trying to grab Leon and just like crush his throat. But see, there's the jab right there. There's a stab. So it doesn't kill him, which is expected. But if that's the case, though, why is it that when Leon stabs enemies on the ground, it actually kills them? I mean, maybe it's just the fact that he's stabbing the enemy under the chin rather than directly into their skull. It's a little odd that way, but it's good nonetheless. I say good nonetheless, but you take instant damage, so I'm not going to be using this mechanic whatsoever. I mean, for all I know, there could be animations on this game that don't deal instant damage. But to be honest, like in the original version of Resident Evil 4, I can't think of a single grab animation, aside from the animation where the enemies grab you from behind. I can't think of a single animation that didn't do instant damage to you the moment the animation started. But right here, this is interesting. So Leon gets grabbed by this enemy, and then it triggers this cutscene. So there's cutscenes within the gameplay? That's very strange. And look at that right there. Look at this chainsaw, man. Look how ferocious he looks. I love the way his eyes look. Those are some pretty creepy eyes. I mean, I don't know how I would compare the eyes of this chainsaw man to the eyes of the Lycans or to the Varkalax, because the Varkalax had some of the scariest eyes, or like the scariest eyes I've ever seen in a Resident Evil game. But this could be on the same level, honestly. And you'll notice that his face underneath that burlap sack, it's a lot more disfigured, and it makes sense why he would be wearing the burlap sack, because his role as hiding among the populace, like being like a sleeper agent, like this is the whole point of the Plagas. Like the Plagas are a communicative species, like they mingle among the populace through their host, and that's why they come across as unsuspecting. And that was one of the main things I liked about Resident Evil 4 with the portrayal of the villagers. They looked like normal people, and like they had some like changes to their eye color, for instance, that gave away that they were a Plaga. But you know, I like the fact that they were portrayed as unsuspecting. But I feel like with the way the villagers are presented in Resident Evil 4 Remake, they look a lot more gory. They don't look so unsuspecting, and it comes across as a little strange. You know, like, that was one of the main selling points with the Plaga that I think BOW researchers were actually marketing the Plaga as in black market research. I mean, they said that the Plaga could be used for unsuspecting attacks on enemies. I mean, I think I'm more so quoting the mold's capabilities with the Mutamycete, like the E-type Mutamycete, and with Evelyn. And like Evelyn is portrayed as a very unsuspecting little girl, and she can infect people unsuspectingly, like surreptitiously. And I feel like the portrayal of the villagers here kind of undermines that unsuspecting and surreptitious nature to the host when they're infected by the Plaga. But with the Chainsaw Man, it makes sense, because, you know, his face is so disfigured. He has to be suspecting. He has to be suspicious. He has to actually portray himself as a threat, because obviously when you stare at him, he doesn't look like a normal person. So it makes sense why he has the burlap sack on his head. But, I mean, that's just how I feel about it. I wonder how you guys feel about that, or if you've even given this any thought. But you'll see right here, he actually chops down the structures in this cutscene, so he cuts off your route right here. And I wonder if this is going to play like such a prominent role, because if it's triggered by cutscenes that are tied to enemies grabbing you, then this is not going to be so much of a hassle to deal with. So most likely I'll just be like staying in one part of the area and not even dealing with the Chainsaw Man if it's true that he only spawns in if you go inside of that house, or you just go to some other gate. So this doesn't feel like such a crucial gameplay mechanic right now. But you'll see right here, he comes close to stabbing Leon once again, and then Leon throws him away, stops the attack, which is well designed. And there's the finisher animation. So watch the durability of the knife. It's very hard to see because the coloration that they've chosen for showcasing the degradation of the knife looks very similar to white, when it's like a mild yellow color. But see, the durability is down. He loses a bit of it. You see it right there, it drained. And then the Chainsaw Man's about to attack. And look, this is the counter right here. So this depletes your knife's durability entirely, and I read in an article somewhere that there would be multiple combat knives, but I wonder if that information's false, because if they're introducing the repair function with the merchant, which, if that's the only way to repair your knife, that's really dumb, because like the melee is such a staple part of the Resident Evil series. Like at least for Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, 7, Revelations, not so much with Revelations actually, maybe with Revelations too. But like the games post Resident Evil 4 really stressed upon the whole idea of melee being crucial when you're trying to save your ammunition. Like they used it for very specific scenarios. Like you use your knife intelligently in very specific scenarios to save up on your ammunition. And you have like the older Resident Evil games where knife only was the only way to go because it was more practical to do it that way. I mean, minus Resident Evil 3, I would say. Like Resident Evil 3 original is more practical when using all the weapons, and I feel like that's when Resident Evil got out of this trend of using like melee only or knife only as a baseline, because by doing that you're undermining the other aspects to your gameplay designs. But like going back to what I was saying, I feel like it would make more sense if there were multiple combat knives, or it would make a lot of sense if there are multiple different ways to repair your knife, because the knife is such a crucial part to save up on your ammunition. Like you can't have a Resident Evil game without some kind of melee weapon. That doesn't make any sense. And I also find it very silly, the whole idea of the durability system, because you go to Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil Village, Ethan in Resident Evil 7, he's using a pocket knife, and then in Resident Evil Village, he's using a kitchen knife, yet those knives don't have any form of durability, yet military-grade combat knives can actually break with repeated use, and this is a trend that was established by Resident Evil 2 Remake. Starting from Resident Evil 2 Remake and onward, and focusing specifically on these remade games, every single knife now breaks, which is so bizarre in so many ways, because it's a military-grade combat knife, and yet it breaks compared to a standard pocket knife or a standard kitchen knife. You gotta love that new Capcom logic right there. But as I emphasized before right here, and another point I wanted to address is, like, Leon using his knife to counter this chainsaw man, it's nowhere near as impressive as Ethan using his bare hands to grab the handle of the chainsaw to stop Mia from slashing him, and then he kicks her away. Like, that just goes to show that Ethan Winters is better than Leon in terms of being baller. Like, Leon feels less baller than Ethan in this case if he's having to use his knife to counter a chainsaw. In fact, I'm honestly amazed this works. But then again, it is a military-grade combat knife, so I imagine it wouldn't slice as easily compared to other things when you're using a chainsaw on it. And also, apparently, when you do this counter, it switches off the chainsaw, which I don't think it's going to be that advantageous, because, you know, what's the point when you don't really have the best weaponry to capitalize on that? And most likely, this is another thing as well. You know what they'll do? They will increase the enemy health to an absurd degree on the highest difficulty to force you to use the merchant system. And what this will do is it will force you to rely upon exploits and just running past like 99% of the enemies to get some kind of consistent strategy. And it's so retarded if they embrace that. Because Resident Evil 2 Remake embraced this, Resident Evil Village embraced this. It's just become a trend with these games now, where they have to be very stupid with their enemy placements and display little to no intelligence whatsoever with their design philosophies for their hardest difficulties. But there we go, and that's the end of that. There was some additional gameplay, like, outside of this showcase that, I believe IGN showcased. Oh, you know what, there is actually additional gameplay here, I believe. Yeah, so, let me actually hear, what this guy has to say first.
What did you think? As you just saw, we are paying respect to the original game's world.
Yeah, you won't do that on the highest difficulty because you don't value your animation team or any of your department for that matter. If you're going to be stripping the game bare on the highest difficulty and delivering a pseudo-survival horror experience,
while implementing new ideas and state-of-the-art graphics to strengthen the core concepts of the title. We think this game will provide a fresh experience with a sense of familiarity if you played the original.
I don't buy that for a second. I mean, you can put all the animations you want, you can make the game an over-the-shoulder perspective, but I don't think it's going to be enough to really generate the same level of familiarity
that both newcomers and veterans to Resident Evil 4 will enjoy.
No fucking way.
The Ganados will have all new ways to attack.
So this is new. So that right there is a pretty good hitbox. I imagine if this was some other Resident Evil game, like the older games, that would have hit him. But it's nice to see that new Capcom is showcasing one honest hitbox that actually feels believable.
They are closing in on Leon during his mission and will attack with an even greater variety of methods than in the original release. Leon fights back with firearms.
So see that? This guy is doing the same running attack like Pedro does and what that Chainsaw Man does, so it's not exclusive to the Chainsaw Man, as I was saying.
Close.
But see, there's the counter. You see how... Look at the timing on that. In fact, I honestly wonder if the highest difficulty will reduce the counter window significantly. I imagine that would be a thing. But, I mean, the problem is, will that really make much of a difference? Because if I'm someone who's trying to preserve the durability of my knife, and countering in general just causes the knife's durability to just decrease significantly, I'll probably never use this mechanic for all I know. I'll just keep my distance from the enemies. Or just find a way to run past them if this game is going to be designed for knife only. Like, that's another thing as well. Well, this game, just like Resident Evil Village, put in a stupid Knives Out challenge that is worth the most CP out of any challenge ever. And that just completely goes against the designs that they set up with their game. Knives Out in Resident Evil Village is impractical, and only an idiot would think that it somehow promotes skill, that it's somehow the most skillful thing ever, when you don't even know how skillfully designed gameplay is supposed to look. They probably look at the most, like, uncoordinated dance ever, and they consider that to be flawless. That's what it's like with those idiots who think that Resident Evil Village is serviceable for Knives Out. But why they would market it with like 70,000 CP as if this game is actually designed for it, and why they would even put it in the game and then try to be so strict on the constraints to the point where you can't even use your target finder against Uriah Straw here, and so you're spending 20 to 25 minutes knifing his leg because that's somehow compelling gameplay and it doesn't look stupid in any sort of way. Like, when a developer is going to be that fucking incompetent like that deluded, and that idiotic, and so alien in thinking, what do you bet that is going to be emulated in Resident Evil 4 Remake? The fucking idiots they are. Oh, and also another thing as well. Remember how in Resident Evil 2 Remake, where you broke your knife, and then for some unknown reason, the characters would go into this inspecting animation where they would stare at their broken knife, even when enemies were right in front of them? So the amount of times you broke your knife, and your character would be inspecting the knife, even when the enemies were close to you, and you couldn't sprint, and this gave the enemies a free opportunity to hit you, how fucking retarded was that? And most likely, it's going to be in this game. Because what I expect will happen is they will basically take the assets from Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil Village, but they will not fix the issues present with those assets and those mechanics in those original games. They will not do it. They will most likely not do it because they want to deliver a half-baked product. And I'm not buying for a second that this game is mechanically complex. I have to play the demo and the actual game for myself to really see. Like, it all sounds like I'm being, like, very jaded. It all sounds like I'm being very negative to this game, but there is a part of me that wants this game to be good. I mean, will I be attached to Leon as a character? Definitely not, because I can't be attached to the older Resident Evil characters the same way I can be attached to Ethan Winters, for instance. But moving past that, just mechanically, I'm not expecting much from this game, because the hardest difficulty of Resident Evil Village has really put this game into a whole new perspective. And I have to look at this game, like, if I was a developer and I was looking at this game, and I was on their team, I would have to think like a brain-dead idiot. I'd have to think like I didn't have any oxygen pumped into my brain at birth. I'd have to think like that when thinking about the potential designs that will go into the hardest difficulty, or the lack of potential designs that will go into the hardest difficulty for this game. And that's why I'm just very skeptical with this game, despite my partial excitement for this game. And like the new gameplay was interesting to see, and I do like the portrayal of the village intro, but it's not going to mean much if the hardest difficulty is going to compromise everything, and new Capcom will just be completely deluded as the thing that is the true experience for a survival horror game, or just a game in general.
Close combat maneuver.
And you see right there, Leon countered him. I mean, I didn't really see the knife durability go down, but again, it's probably on amateur or normal difficulty, so maybe that's just a thing with their modifier, where countering doesn't decrease your durability on these difficulties. But on the hardest difficulty, it'll most likely take off like half of your durability, most likely. That's what I'm expecting from this idiotic development team, and I will never use this mechanic ever. But when you follow up with the deflect, you can melee, which is good. So this right here is pretty cool. So I guess I take back what I said. So like the villagers are unsuspecting with the way they're designed. Like look at this guy. Like you would think that this was a normal person you were fighting when he's actually infected by the plaga. I like that unsuspecting nature that they're showing right over here. But it's just I didn't notice it previously with some of the original gameplay and like the original trailers that they showed for this game.
Combat maneuvers, a newly added parry using his knife, and more.
And see that it completely broke his knife.
Resource management and upgrade elements are critical for survival.
I'm hoping they emulate that properly from the original version of Resident Evil 4, because ammo management was so crucial in Resident Evil 4 when you weren't using the merchant. And so many of these fucking idiots want to say that Resident Evil 4 is not a survival horror game, yet they indulge in the merchant system, which is a diametrically opposed idea to the very idea of survival horror. Like, if these idiots weren't so invested with the merchant system so much, maybe then they would actually get a convincing survival horror experience, and that's exactly what I got with Resident Evil 4, and it far outranks the supposed survival horror experience of Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and even Resident Evil Village.
Just as in the
Then here's the inventory system. So it's clear that they're using the assets from Resident Evil Village when designing the inventory on this game, and the problem is Resident Evil Village's inventory system, while it makes you think it's like Resident Evil 4's inventory system, it's not. The inventory has minor problems that when summed together can be a major hindrance on the actual gameplay. And I mean, I'm not going to go into much detail about this. I don't know how to properly explain it without actually having it appear on screen. But when you see my poor designs of Resident Evil Village series, and I am planning on doing more parts to it, you will understand the problems with the inventory system in Resident Evil Village and why it is not the same inventory system from Resident Evil 4. And most likely, this inventory system will have the same problems, and I've never been a big fan of this. Like, Resident Evil 7's inventory system was amazing. The fact that it didn't pause the game, the fact that you could, like, prematurely place your cursor on an item, and then the next time you open the inventory, your cursor's over that item, and so you spend less time fumbling in the inventory that way. Like, it was such a fun process to engage in. It took skill in knowing where to place your cursor. It was a very fun rhythm to get into with Resident Evil 7's inventory system. But you don't get that in Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village, and even in this game. And I've never been a fan of this, and most likely, because of the fact that you can upgrade your inventory system at the merchant, they will neglect a lot of minor design choices with the inventory system that make it less cumbersome to handle. Because I imagine new Capcom's solution to handle these minor problems that just add up to be a major hindrance to the inventory system, their solution is just to upgrade your inventory at the merchant. So it's just going to be another way to force you to use the merchant system.
Original. Using the attaché case effectively will be key. In addition to managing the weapons
And this right here I do like. So I like the fact that crafting is returning in this game. Like, crafting is something that should be in every Resident Evil game. It's something that promotes creativity. It's something that allows you to experiment. It's something that allows you to create a new kind of experience for yourself with knowing which ammunition to craft. I mean, when you're finding, like, the one good experience, like the one route that actually works, it's not going to feel so diverse like that. But the fact that you have the ability to craft like this just allows you to be very strategic in your approach, and it's good that they brought it into this game. And, you know, I kind of wish that Resident Evil 4 had this. But it looks like we have traditional gunpowder, and I'm not too sure what the other ingredient is to craft handgun ammo and shotgun shells. But also, Ether noted this as well. But you see the red and yellow herb combination? So Ether mentioned this, and I completely forgot this existed in Resident Evil 2 Remake until Ether mentioned it. But in Resident Evil 2 Remake, if you combined a red and blue herb together, what this does is it would increase the chance of you being invulnerable to enemy attacks, or rather, I think what happened was it would reduce the damage that enemies did to you. So it looks like they're bringing in something like this into Resident Evil 4 Remake. And it's primarily with the red and yellow combination. And I imagine with the green, red, and yellow combination, it will just allow you to get full health and increase your max HP as well. Oh, my fault.
This also allows you to craft ammunition.
And you see that just then. So what's this bonus feature? So alongside the 15... Oh no, it's because of the charm. That's what it is. So this bonus 5 ammo is the result of this case and charm perk, which I imagine is a pre-order bonus. And I did pre-order this game, but I'm not going to implement the charms whatsoever because it's stupid.
And other items.
And here it is, the guy I vehemently despise in every Resident Evil game, the fucking merchant system. I mean, the merchant system was not a problem whatsoever in Resident Evil 4 OG, but ever since Resident Evil Village, the merchant system has been the worst gameplay mechanic ever, and it's so diametrically opposed to the idea of survival horror gameplay. I mean, if it's good for like a backup, just in case you messed up, or you want to try something experimental for like some video, like some fun video, then yes, go for it. But just for a general playthrough, it's so unnecessary. And in Resident Evil Village, it was even more insulting because the merchant, because he influenced the natural progression of the fundamental gameplay of Resident Evil Village, it went against the very message of Resident Evil Village, which is Ethan's personal journey. But by making the merchant such a forced feature in Resident Evil Village, it's almost like you're telling the story of the merchant. It's the Duke's personal journey rather than Ethan's personal journey, and how the Duke was able to influence the continuity of events to allow Ethan to get out of that situation alive with being in the village area entirely. It's so fucking stupid like that. Like, I can't stand that about the Duke in Resident Evil Village, and he's worse than the merchant in general from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Stranger.
Of course.
And worst of all, if they decide to force the merchant upon you like crazy, it'll just be a microtransaction system. And most likely it will affect the balancing of the game. Enemies are going to tank so many hits, they will not flinch. The enemy placements will make absolutely no sense whatsoever, and there'll just be so many enemies stacked against you, and it doesn't fit the loss of these mechanics on the hardest difficulty.
We can't forget the merchant.
Yeah, just... You can understand my concerns here after playing Resident Evil Village.
Something new for you.
You can purchase.
And this right here is very concerning. Do you see the crafting recipe right there? Recipe for bolts. So it looks like we're back to the standard Resident Evil Village model where you have to purchase the crafting recipes from the merchant. And with Ethan, it makes absolutely no sense because Ethan went through military training. Not only that, but he had the ability to craft items in Resident Evil 7 by just simply picking up the item and getting access to its crafting recipe like that. But apparently his military training and his prior experiences in Resident Evil 7 were completely ignored when they forced a fundamental mechanic like crafting into the merchant system with purchasing the recipes. And with Leon, it makes even less sense because Leon has gone through how much training? He's gone through years of intense training. He went through Dark Side Chronicles. He went through Operation Javier, was it? Is that what it was called? Where he was with Krauser and he was rescuing Manuela and he was investigating the T. Veronica strain. But, like, he's gone through experiences like that. And apparently he doesn't know how to craft items without getting the recipe. His basic survival techniques that he gained when training with the government, he should be able to craft the ammunition on his own, or at least examine items to allow him to craft them. Why does he have to purchase the recipes from the merchant? Why are you restricting a fundamental gameplay mechanic to the merchant system? Like, this is a further sign that this game is going to force the merchant upon you like crazy.
Just weapons and items.
And also, what is that? Is that the amount of inventory space that it takes up? Like, you see, like, just before the actual cost of each of the items, there's, like, Braille there's Braille there. I think what that is it's some kind of scale model of the amount of space it will take up in the inventory system. So I didn't notice that originally.
Purchase weapons and items, and customize them to suit your playstyle.
So this is interesting. So you had the ability to upgrade the damage on your knife, and I originally thought this was the only game to do this, but now that I think about it, Resident Evil Revelations 1 gave you the ability to upgrade your melee damage with a specific custom part. Revelations 2 had upgrades specific to the knife's damage. Resident Evil 6 had the skill tree system, or I'm sorry, not skill tree system. It had the skill point system, and there was an upgrade that allowed you to upgrade your melee damage. But they brought it in this game, which I don't know how useful this is going to be, because again, if this game is going to be designed without the merchant in mind, this will be pointless, but most likely it will be designed with the merchant in mind. But it's only providing a very slight increase. I mean, it's increasing from 0.6 to 0.7, and the final amount is 0.8, I believe. Yeah, see, 0.8, and that's the final amount. But that's such a small increase in damage. Why would I ever want to do that? Really doesn't make any sense to me, guys. But let's move on.
We've also added a trade mechanic where rare gems...
This doesn't make any fucking sense, okay? So, they're allowing you to use rare gems to purchase stuff from here, but how is this any different to selling the gem to get money and then using that money to get these resources? This is a huge case of Occam's razor right here. This is just the same peseta system where you're just using money to buy resources, only you're using gems. And why is it that, they could have just structured it to be like, oh, you have these spinels, and I imagine these were spinels. Like, these look a lot like the spinels from Resident Evil 4 OG. But the thing is that you could sell those spinels and then use that money to get resources. It's literally the same thing, but the aesthetic is different. This is Occam's razor right here. This whole system of using rare gems to get resources is no different to selling that rare gem, getting the points, and then using those points to buy stuff. And they want to treat it as if it's new. They literally said this is a brand new mechanic, yet it doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, if this was the original version of Resident Evil 4, all of these items would be available, and you'd be able to purchase them using your normal pesetas. But they want you to use rare gems for some reason, which makes no fucking sense. This is the most redundant mechanic ever for the merchant system, by far.
You've collected can be exchanged for special items.
You can't go wrong with that.
We are rebuilding the original game while respecting its core experience, adding...
Nice, look at that. So he does the low kick in order to capitalize on the deflect, and it knocks him to the ground, and then you can probably stab them, although I just question how good the detection is. Because I imagine, the way this villager is facing Leon when he's on the ground, because his head is not close to Leon, this might be very strange on the detection, I imagine, unless they have an animation specific for it.
New ideas and modernizing the playfield.
Oh yeah, that's right, there's the story trailer right here. I completely forgot about this. So this looks pretty cool. I guess does that mural talk about the Las Plagas? That's a beheaded corpse right there, in the mural. And that blue face, not too sure what that's supposed to represent, but the red skull right there could possibly be the Plagas. Although technically, I don't know if this whole society has actually existed before the Plagas. I mean, we know, actually, yeah, that is true, actually. I mean, we know, in the original version of Resident Evil 4, one of the Castellans of the castle, he sealed up the mine where the Las Plagas were fossilized, but then Ramon Salazar, he opened up the mine again and was starting to excavate the Plagas. So I wonder if they're going to change anything with that. And there's Ashley, so she's being forced down by these cultists. I'm not too sure what they're doing right now. I mean, obviously they're trying to implant Ashley, but is this something else entirely? Like, what are they doing this for? Like, if you remember, in the original version of Resident Evil 4, during the events of Chapter 4, Salazar said that Ashley went through some ritual, and then after the ritual was done, she was then taken to the island. But what exactly was that ritual, though? Is this what's happening right now?
You're here looking for someone? Maybe. Some missing señorita?
I am not a big fan of Lewis's look. Lewis just looks like a homeless person, if I'm completely honest. Just the way his face is shaped, the way his hair is. Not a big fan of the way he looks. It looks very weird to me. And I don't know if I'm a big fan of his voice actor. This seems a little bizarre to me.
Ashley, where are you?
Okay, so I think this is Victoria's Mendez's mansion. I mean, oh, my fault. So we saw this same portrait of Osmond Sadler inside of Victoria's Mendez's manor. Or not really a manor, it's just his house. His house wasn't that big. I wonder if you'll be able to search behind the paintings for treasure or maybe resources.
Your soul.
Oh, there he is, Victoria's Mendez. So, yeah, he looks very different, and they've given him the hat because they want to continue that whole funny trend of hats being a part of these BOWs with Mr. X, this and that. And I remember the Resident Evil podcast team joking about this. I remember them saying, like, Leon, he's going to look at Victoria's Mendez, and that hat will remind him of Mr. X, and he will have post-traumatic stress disorder. That was hilarious, just hearing that from the Resident Evil podcast team. If new Capcom decides to go with that, that's going to be stupid. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense for Leon. I mean, actually, maybe it does, because I mean that's how PTSD is. It varies with individuals, but surely he's encountered like many other BOWs before this. I mean, he's gone through years of training. He's gone through Operation Javier, for crying out loud. So I don't really see how he would get post-traumatic stress disorder from this. Okay, and that looks like the church from Chapter 2 of Resident Evil... No, not Chapter 2, sorry. It was Chapter 1. And that's where Ashley's being held.
Requires cleansing.
Okay, and there's the plaga bursting out of the head. I'm a little confused by that, though, because... See, the thing is that the plagas... Oh, no. Actually, that was a thing in Resident Evil 4. The very first plaga you encountered, the plaga burst out of the head of its own accord. It wasn't forced out via physical trauma. It actually came out on its own accord. A main point established with the plagas in Resident Evil 4 is that the plagas are vulnerable to sunlight at this stage because they've been fossilized for so long, so they haven't been exposed to sunlight very well. So basically, that's why flash grenades can kill them, because plagas have a weakness to UV radiation. And given this shot right now, it looks like this is taking place during the dark. So because it's nighttime, that's when the plagas are going to emerge from the head. Although it was a little confusing, though, that the very first plaga you encountered, it came out of its host head of its own volition. Yet this was never really seen in gameplay aspects of Resident Evil 4 and onward. Like, you never saw this occur at all. Like, the only time the plagas ever came out of the host was when you dealt enough physical trauma to them. And you could stop the mutation entirely. Like, you could avoid the plaga entirely by kicking them, by doing melee attacks on them. That's one of the things that made the suplex so reliable, even though it's nowhere near as good as the suplex from Resident Evil 5 when Josh was doing it during his DLC. But the suplex did a lot of high damage to the Ganados and the Maginis. Specifically with the Ganado, it varied in its instant kill capabilities. But it was very reliable that way. But you could use your melee attack strategically to get rid of the Plagas. It wasn't that well designed in Resident Evil 4, and I'm honestly glad that Resident Evil 5 had a dedicated melee system specific for stopping enemies from mutating. That's why when you get a Cephalo out of an enemy's head, they're incredibly annoying and tanky, and it's dumb that they can take like 7 to 8 shotgun shells to go down. But you got to make sure that you are prioritizing the limbs on the enemies and putting them into flinch animations that you can punish, so that you can stop them from actually getting the plug out of their heads. And I just wonder, with certain animations like the ground takedown animation, where you stab an enemy on the ground, or when you kick enemies, will that actually stop the plagas from emerging? I hope that's a thing, because the plagas in Resident Evil 4, even though they did die pretty fast if you were using a shotgun, they weren't well designed. I mean, the plaga type A's were the most broken plagas because they had the ability to hit you through geometry, and their ability to passively damage you if you were close to them, it was so ambiguous with its hit detection that it really shouldn't be in attack. I mean, it was the same case with the Cephalos, but the Cephalos had a bit more sense to when they would damage you. However, I will say one thing that Resident Evil 4 did a lot better than Resident Evil 5 was that in Resident Evil 4, whenever an enemy's head burst, the plaga took time to come out of the head. Like, there was a period of time between the head bursting and the plaga emerging. So you never got blindsided by some random plaga emerging from the head. In Resident Evil 5, the plagas immediately emerged from the head. So the amount of times you would finish off an enemy at close range, and you would just take damage from nothing when it turns out it was because a plaga emerged from the head, and it just damaged you, that's really retarded in that game. But I just wonder what model this game will favor. Will it favor the Resident Evil 4 model with the grace period, or will it be instant with when the plagas come out of the head? That's what I'm a little concerned about. And also, how much damage will these enemies take? Because most likely on the highest difficulty, the plagas will take an absurd amount of punishment, and it just will not make any sense. And I'm hoping that the melee, with its diverse options, will allow you to actually dispatch the enemies without them ever having the plagas emerge. But knowing the highest difficulty, they'll remove Leon's melee, and they'll strip it down to the bare minimum, which wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Cleansing.
And there's the egg. So like I said before, at this stage with the plagas had to be injected into the host via an egg form. So they injected the egg into the plaga, and this had complications because the host could easily fight back against the plaga during their egg stage form. And because the plaga was also in the process of maturing, during that maturation process, the host could easily resist the plaga's influence. So I'm hoping all that with the lore gets touched in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I'm hoping they touch upon this when it comes to the interpretation of the infection via the plaga.
Ashley Graham, are you in here?
Just let me go.
Listen.
Yeah, she seems a lot more baller with trying to attack with Candelabra compared to how she was in the original version of Resident Evil 4. In fact, I actually read some articles regarding Ashley, and apparently Ashley will be able to use a knife in this game. And there's also a moment that happens later on in this trailer where Ashley is holding a gun, like she's being controlled by Osmond Sadler, and she's trying to shoot Leon, I imagine.
I'm hearing the president's orders.
What is that? What do we do?
The lost lambs are escaping.
See, the Lost Lambs are escaping. See, I don't understand that. Like, when he's saying the Lost Lambs are escaping, is he saying that before Leon and Ashley have been injected? In fact, one thing I forgot to mention about this scene right here, is Ashley actually injected with the plaga? Like, is the plaga inside of her right now? That's the question I want to pose right here. Is the plaga inside of Ashley right now at this point in the game? And then this whole quote with the Lost Lambs are escaping, like, it would make a lot of sense if Sadler was saying this before they were injected. And that's why I was asking whether Ashley was infected by the plaga during that part where she's trying to attack Leon with the candelabra.
The lost lambs are escaping.
We need to go!
And look at that. It looks like the guns are going to show up in the cutscenes now, which is good. It's nice that they're using the in-engine cinematics rather than pre-rendered cutscenes that don't show their full weaponry. I wonder if that's going to be a thing as well. Remember in Resident Evil 4 where you could shoot enemies near ledges and they would fall down? I doubt that's going to be a mechanic in this game. Knowing new Capcom, they're going to be incompetent as to not realize that was a mechanic in the original version of Resident Evil 4, as well as in the Evil Within 1, where you could shoot enemies near ledges and they would fall down. It was a lot more effective in Evil Within 1 because the enemies in Resident Evil 4, a lot of the times they survived the falls when you shot them near ledges, but in Evil Within, as soon as they fell off the ledge, they did not survive, which was really well designed, and it added so much creativity to the game with certain chapters.
I'm gonna get you home safe.
You can stop right there.
Now, I despise this a lot. I despise Ada's voice actress. No offense, guys, and not to be rude, but this voice actress, I would associate her with being like a chubby character who's very funny, like just for some comedy show. But she doesn't capture the essence of being a spy, or like working for the rival organization, or like being a very slender individual with acrobatic capabilities. Like this voice actress doesn't sound like Ada at all. It doesn't, like, this voice actress doesn't feel complementary to the physical characteristics of Ada and her reputation as a spy. Like, again, this voice actress sounds like a voice actress you'd hear in some comedy show and who's very chubby, this and that. Like, they sound like someone who would actually be stuffing their faces with food and junk food, this and that. Not for a spy like her. That just seems very odd to me, and it doesn't feel right with me, guys. Like, we know as well that Ada was in a false relationship with John before the events of Resident Evil 2, and that's how she gained access to a lot of the T-virus research, and also information on the G-virus as well. But, you know, like, for someone who was able to seduce John so easily, a researcher of Umbrella, that's not the voice I would associate with a seductive voice. I'm just saying that the normal person would never fall for this kind of voice so easily. You know, because a lot of people have this, like, sexual and erotic fantasy for Ada, and it's just so gross and disgusting, and I don't want to think of Ada like that at all. And that's what they were trying to go for a Resident Evil 2 remake, where Ada just didn't feel that interesting of a character, and so many people only liked her because of the way she looked and the way she sounded. But Ada was so boring in Resident Evil 2 remake. I mean, she was also boring in Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 6 is where they really got Ada right, and then her redemption arc at the end, that was pretty cool for a character development in a character that we barely get to see. But, you know, I don't really see them improving Ada from Resident Evil 4. And this voice actress, that's not a good start to this supposed improvement to her character.
Ada? Who are you? And what are you doing here?
My faithful disciple will show her.
Now, this is cool right here. I'd like the way the El Gigantes look in this game. I mean, I feel like this portrayal with the El Gigante makes a bit more sense if their bone mass, like their bone density, is a result of the plaga, and like they're growing to this huge size. So there's going to be some tears in the skin. There's going to be a lot of grotesque features to them. There's going to be a lot of stuff like that with their disfigurations and the like, and they've really captured it nicely with the El Gigante, and it's good to see that the El Gigante is back in this game. He's a lot more tubby, I should be saying. Like, I feel like the El Gigante looked a lot more muscular, but this guy looks a lot more tubby and a lot more flabby. Well, watch someone make a joke out of that and just come up with some flabby nickname for this guy. Because I'm not creative enough to come up with that kind of nickname for him.
Ashley, run!
So this right here is Delago. So Delago in the original version of Resident Evil 4 was trash. I mean, in the original version of Resident Evil 4, he wasn't so bad, actually, because he died after 15 hits from the harpoon. I mean, the controls could really screw you, though, with Delago, and you had to play a lot of waiting, and, you know, there were just times where he could just catch you randomly, regardless of what you do. Like, you'd have no way to defend yourself against Delago, and he would just capsize you instantly. And then in Resident Evil 4 VR, they made him worse. In Resident Evil 4 VR, they gave him so much life. It took almost like 45 to 50 harpoon shots to actually take down Delago, and the chances of being screwed by the poor designs with Delago was very high, and that's why he's a shit fight in that game. But I'm hoping this will be a decent fight. I mean, I'm wondering if Leon will even use his harpoons. It might be a harpoon gun for all I know, but yeah, I'm curious to see the methodology for how Leon will be attacking Delago now.
The entire world shall overflow with his grace.
What's happening to me?
So there's Salazar, and it looks like, oh, okay, so I was wrong. So it looks like the two Vertigos are back. So I read an article stating that there was only one Vertigo. I can't believe I didn't notice this, but the two Vertigos are here. So I bet what's going to happen is they're going to do the same thing like they did in the original version of Resident Evil 4, where the second Vertigo merges with Salazar and the Queen Plaga to become this this amalgamated Plaga, and then the first Vertigo will be its own boss fight. I wonder if they'll make any improvements to Vertigo. I mean, Leon was only lucky to deal with Vertigo because he had the liquid nitrogen tanks at his disposal. And Vertigo was a pretty good fight. I mean, he was decent, and it was cool that you had the ability to force Vertigo to go into his attack animations, and that would delay him from shaking off the liquid nitrogen. So that definitely contributed to some knife-only tactics against him that were pretty engaging. But for the most part, Vertigo is meant to be a timed fight, so you got to survive for a set amount of time until the elevator arrives. But it was just there were certain parts of Vertigo that were pretty broken. Like, going through doors, if Vertigo was so close to you when you were opening doors, there was nothing you could do. Like, he never did any QTE attacks whenever you were near doors, or, like, whenever you got to the door first before he got to you. And it could be very problematic with Vertigo. And also, Vertigo had the ability to teleport in Resident Evil 4. So, sometimes when you're running away from him, or when he goes back into the ceiling, when you go to a specific part of the hallway, he just appears around the corner somehow. And also, like, in the remastered version of Resident Evil 4, a lot of the times when you were holding your pistol out and you were sprinting, Vertigo would sometimes not do the QTE attacks. So he'd do the normal jab, and it could throw you off. So you'd accidentally try to do the QTE when it's not there, and he just gets you. And that's why I always made sure to equip a grenade so that I'm moving at my fastest speed, so that he's always doing the QTE attacks. But yeah, I mean, I imagine the concept could be improved a bit more because for the most part, a lot of it is just QTEs and just running away from him, unless you're using liquid nitrogen to your advantage. But I'm hoping they do something a little differently with Vertigo.
With his grace.
What's happening to me?
Oh, Ashley sounds very old here. She sounds like an adult with this voice acting. Or maybe it's just the fact that there's blood going through her throat, so it's just causing her to have a more raspy voice.
Now. Now.
Huh. It doesn't look like Sadler's holding his staff in this shot. He was holding it in the first trailer for Resident Evil 4 Remake. But I'm surprised he's not holding it here. The staff has a plaga inside. It has a dominant plaga that emits a sound that is picked up by the sound organs of the other plaga, and that's what allows it to relay commands. That's how Sadler is able to exercise his will over the plagas through that scepter, and the fact that he doesn't have it here is very confusing.
Abandon.
And it looks like this part right here, Sadler is taking advantage over his control over the plaga to subdue Leon for the time being, similar to what it was like in Chapter 5 of the original version of Resident Evil 4.
Abandon your body.
And there's Bitor. Okay, so they've kept Bitor's Mendez intact, so he's still going to have that same mutated form. And Bitor's Mendez in the original version of Resident Evil 4 was actually scary. I feel like they captured the fear factor with Bitor's Mendez nicely in that barn fight. And the fact that he goes down after 5 incendiary grenades is perfect. It's strategic use of your incendiary grenades to not only deal a lot of damage to him, but to free up your inventory. You save those incendiary grenades for Bitor's Mendez, and he goes down super fast, and it's really well designed in that game, but most likely it's not going to have that because new Capcom is just more keen on their games being dragged out for the dumbest reasons ever, rather than having a lot of meat to the length of the games for the right reasons. In fact, here's a question I should pose. You think this game is going to be very short compared to the original version of Resident Evil 4? Because I'm hoping it's not going to be, because every time they design a Resident Evil game for speedrunning, it's always going to be shit. It's going to be stripped down to the bare minimum. It's always going to be very boring, and like the story beats don't pick up properly if the games are going to be so short. Like you need, like I'm hoping this game has a similar length to the original version of Resident Evil 4 or to Resident Evil 5, or even actually no, not Resident Evil Village. And like maybe it could have a similar length to Resident Evil Village, but it has to spice up the lore. Like Resident Evil Village barely had any files to read. It barely had any lore. It barely had anything to spice up the gameplay, to spice up the story, to flesh it out. And if they're supposedly like remaking this game and they're fleshing out the story, because originally with the original version of Resident Evil 4, they only had 2 weeks to finish the story because of time constraints, and that's why the story in Resident Evil 4 has some very strange problems to it, then most assuredly they'd have to make the story a lot more fleshed out here if they acknowledge that this is an issue. But you can only do that if you don't design your game for speedrunning. If you get this game done in like less than like 5 hours or something, like on a similar length to The Evil Within, that makes a lot of sense for length. But the thing is that new Capcom is so keen on marketing the Resident Evil games for speedrunning with Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake that it's most likely Resident Evil 4 Remake will follow the same trend, and I don't want to see that.
Leave the girl. She's lost no matter what.
I don't like your voice acting, Ada. And I like the way Salazar is portrayed. So he's still a midget, but he sounds older now. He doesn't sound like a younger person in a very old body. He actually sounds like a noble individual right here, albeit a bloodthirsty and sadistic individual.
How the yes, Joseph.
So this looks like it's just before Leon and Ashley go inside of the castle while they're being chased by the horde of villagers in the original version of Resident Evil 4.
Indeed.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
So here, it looks like Sadler is compelling and controlling Ashley to shoot at Leon. I mean, how did she get his gun, though? Maybe what happened was Sadler subdues Leon through his control of the Plaga. He subdues both of the characters. And then, like a puppet, he's able to compel Ashley to pick up Leon's gun and try to shoot him. Maybe that's what's happening right here. And I believe that's it. So yeah, guys, a lot to analyze there with Resident Evil 4 Remake, and absolutely nothing to analyze with the Shadows of Rose DLC or the third-person mode for Resident Evil Village. But yeah, this was a very lengthy analysis video for this showcase. And, you know, at least they gave some content for Resident Evil 4 Remake, unlike with Resident Evil Village. But, yeah, thank you guys for watching this analysis/reaction video, and I'm still looking forward to Resident Evil 4 Remake. I am looking forward to the demo. Of course, if it's timed, that's going to be bad, because I'll know this game is going to be severely compromised if they release a timed demo. But yeah, it'll be very interesting, and it'll be very fun to get back into the Resident Evil vibe, because recently I haven't been that into Resident Evil until the showcase came, and I got back into Resident Evil Village and other Resident Evil games. And, you know, I have, like, classes and other things happening, so it's really taking a lot of time away from me to actually devote to these games, which is what I want to be doing. And, yeah, that's just the summary of my situation right now. But, yeah, I'll be doing a blind playthrough of the Shadows of Rose DLC, and I'll even do a walkthrough of the Shadows of Rose DLC, as well as the third-person mode for Resident Evil Village, and you can most undoubtedly expect a blind playthrough of Resident Evil 4 Remake, as well as a walkthrough. And for the most part, I expect my reaction to Resident Evil 4 Remake to be very negative, because it's the Resident Evil 2 Remake and the Resident Evil Village team that are making this game, and given the reputation of those development teams, I shouldn't expect much from this game, especially for its highest difficulty. But thank you guys for watching, and you take care now.